We are watching the #1 bodybuilder on the planet.
This is Phil's show. I don't know where you pick apart Phil Heath.
Phil's goal is to win 10 Olympias. He stated that.
Very, very rarely does somebody keep winning over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's 7 times.
The Gift, Phil Heath.
Gifted. Having exceptional talent or natural ability. People who are said to be gifted have an advanced ability and potential to excel relative to their peers. If you look back on each phase of your education, you can probably remember always being in a class with that one student who always managed to excel more than the rest of the class. Often, that student just studied significantly harder than the others, but sometimes that wasn't the case. Sometimes that student didn't study much at all, yet would still walk away on exam day with a grade 10 points higher than what you studied every night for. This student can be seen as intellectually gifted, because learning in academia comes easy to them. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you can probably remember going to school with someone who was far more physically gifted and advanced than the rest of their peers. Someone who, despite not having developed a strong training regimen, was still bigger, faster, and stronger than everyone else before reaching physical muscle maturity. For me, this was Indianapolis Colts defensive end Kwity Paye.
Knocked it loose and grabbed it.
Freshman year of high school, I vividly remember asking him about what his training regimen was like, to which he responded, "I don't work out." And it would be at this moment that I met the first person in my life who was genetically gifted. However, whether you're intellectually gifted or genetically gifted, your overall potential hinges greatly on your ability to maximize those gifts. Your work ethic, your drive, and your desire to be the best at what you do is what will separate you from being the gifted kid who became stagnant or the legend who becomes a household name. And in the bodybuilding world, there have been quite a few. Although most professional bodybuilders are physically gifted when compared to the general populace, this becomes a lot more nuanced when comparing bodybuilders to other bodybuilders. Because bodybuilding is a discipline of pursuing perfection, and at the end of the day, not everyone has the same potential. While legends like Arnold, Dorian Yates, and Ronnie Coleman all had physical gifts that put them far ahead of the competition, there have been other legends whose potential was capped despite having the same work ethic as the men previously mentioned. However, as the next generation of gifted athletes came, there would be one man who would embody the term gifted so well that he would rightfully earn that nickname, and in the process, earn a spot on bodybuilding's Mount Rushmore. Philip Gerard Heath was born December 18, 1979 in the inner city of Seattle, Washington, to working-class parents Donald and Rosella Heath. As the term implies, his parents needed to work consistently to be able to provide for their family, which made Phil have to become more self-sufficient and independent at a young age. When he was 2 years old, Donald and Rosella would divorce, and Rosella would go on to remarry. Phil acknowledges his stepfather as having been a very positive influence in his life. He worked at NBC News affiliate King 5, while his mother worked in cargo services for Sealand. His biological father also worked various jobs, so the adults in his life set the example for what hard work was supposed to look like. Growing up in South Seattle, Phil saw a lot of violence and crime. One Christmas during his childhood, he came home with his parents to find that their windows had been broken and the Christmas presents were gone. He would even go on to witness one of his friend's brothers get shot multiple times right in front of him. To juxtapose the hard environment Phil had to deal with was a competitive and talented crop of kids in his neighborhood and Seattle as a whole. He grew up with the Burleson brothers, whose family is considered to be Seattle's first family of the professional sports world. Corey Dillon and Jason Terry were also standout athletes that Phil grew up around. He idolized Bo Jackson and Herschel Walker for their impressive shapes and work ethic in the gym, and idolized Michael Jordan for his unmatched killer mentality. He even did some martial arts during his childhood. So at a very young age, Phil knew that he wanted to be great at something. He just didn't know what that something was yet. With a strong work ethic instilled in him at a very young age, and other competitive peers to measure up to, Phil was comfortable pursuing his first passion, basketball.
5'10" senior, number 22, Philip Heath.
He went to Rainier Beach High School in Seattle, where he played 4 years as a shooting guard and eventually became the varsity captain. Phil was a solid basketball player, despite his physical shortcomings. At 5'9", 180 pounds, the odds of success at the next level were pretty slim for him, but being the competitor that he is, that was only fuel for him to grind even harder. He was a combo guard who played the 2 on offense and the 1 on defense, and was also a very strong defender who played the role of a scrappy pest. Think Patrick Beverley. Throughout most of his high school basketball career, Phil was the guy, and the standout player at his high school. That was until a guy named Jamal Crawford showed up.
He's the most exciting player I've seen.
Well, he certainly is. You asked me a question about a comparison to an Irvin Johnson at a younger age. Very Irvin Johnson-esque like skills. He really makes people better. Not a great shooter, but a scorer. But more than anything else,
Jamal and Phil played together for only one season. But in that one season, Jamal made Phil realize that he wasn't as good as he thought he was. Because basketball came so much easier for Jamal, and he had the physical assets to be a stud. And for Phil, the task of having to keep up with his teammate had the effect that strong competition usually has. It made Phil have to maximize his potential. So, he got to work on improving aspects of his game that could compensate for his height. He improved his vertical, speed, handling, and his defensive prowess. With this new running mate in Jamal and a fire underneath him to win, the pair led their school to a state title in 1998.
Correctly. Shooting 1-1. His team up 3. It's getting done at the line with the pressure on. Don't have time to go coast to coast for a lay-in tonight should he miss. Ball game. With the steal.
Being a state champion put a feather in Phil's cap and made him rightfully believe that he would get more recruits to look at him. But unfortunately for Phil, the offer letters weren't as frequent. While Jamal was getting recruited by multiple D1 schools, Phil was not getting that same level of interest, but was hoping that at least one school would take a chance on him and make his dream of playing D1 ball a reality.
Senior Phil Heath, 5'11", 180. They say he's 5'11". This is Phil Heath. 8 years, oh no, that's him 8 years ago.
Yeah.
You should see him now, though.
Oh, I've seen him now.
Luckily for him, the University of Denver would give him that chance. Phil got a scholarship to go play for the University of Denver's D1 program, where he would be given the opportunity to prove himself at a much higher level. Despite basketball being his main passion, Phil had to seriously self-reflect on his career longevity in the sport and think about a backup plan. At this point, he understood that he wasn't Jamal Crawford and didn't feel like it was a smart idea to put all of his eggs in one basket. In the event that basketball didn't work out, Phil did not want to be in a position where he didn't have anything going for him. So he accepted the offer from Denver due to its academic programs. He majored in IT and business and made sure to stay on top of his academic responsibilities. Having grown up with his parents always working and other kids around him accomplishing their dreams, Phil had made sure to keep his eyes on the prize and filter out any distractions that would get in his way of success. So he steered clear of alcohol, drugs, and lived a straight-edge lifestyle. Now, up until this point, Phil had spent a ton of time in the weight room for basketball, with a focus on improving his game. However, it wasn't paying off to the extent that he was hoping, which started to get to him. See, at this point in Phil's basketball journey, he had been on the University of Denver's team for 4 years, but had not received the minutes he needed to prove himself. He asked his coach what he could do to get more minutes and improve on those aspects accordingly. Phil was willing to do whatever it took to make himself the best basketball player he could be. But despite those efforts, it appeared that he had finally maximized his potential as a basketball player, and he never got the minutes that he was desperately hoping for. At that point, it had never been clearer that Phil's time as a basketball player was coming to an end, a revelation that sent him down a dark path. He explored the possibility of potentially playing overseas, but realized that that wouldn't have been feasible for him. He desperately wanted the same accomplishments as some of his peers. He wanted to become the next success story out of South Seattle and thought that basketball could be the avenue that would lead him to that dream. But the realization that his hard work was just not enough made him question his own worth and sent him into a deep depression. A depression so deep that he attempted to take his own life.
When we were losing, that's when I really got upset. So I was just very, very hurt over the fact that we weren't playing well. The coach wasn't looking at it as a way for me to contribute. And, you know, next thing you know, I'm laying in the street, hoping that someone ran my ass over.
One day while on a run, Phil decided to lay down on the median of a busy street, hoping that a car would hit him, but it never did. And Phil took this as a sign that it wasn't his time yet. The event made him realize that he wanted to succeed at basketball more than he wanted to breathe, a level of dedication that he could transfer into something else. He was able to see that just because basketball didn't work out didn't mean that he wasn't meant for something greater. With the end of his senior year came the end of his basketball career. However, he did have a 5th year left in his degree, and it would be in that year that he would discover a new outlet, an outlet that was very foreign to him. It would be during one of his IT classes when Phil would glance over at one of his classmates' laptops and see bodybuilders on his home screen. He found it fascinating that while he had Brooke Burke as his wallpaper, his classmate had the Golden Era Legends. Now, Phil never saw bodybuilding as weird or odd, nor did he ever make fun of the art form. He did find it interesting and decided that he wanted to learn more. He even saw bodybuilders as real-life comic book characters, and at that point, he had only seen a show or two when bodybuilding shows aired on ESPN. Similar to the rest of the world, he did know who Arnold was, but the inner workings of the industry and the competitive process is something that did pique his interest. While on campus, he transitioned from training in the athlete's weight room to training in the public weight room, where he would gain more exposure to bodybuilders and bodybuilding culture as a whole, something which he quickly fell in love with. He devoted his time to learning more about the sport and its history, as well as teaching himself the nutritional aspect. Every piece of literature he could get his hands on, he would soak up like a sponge, and use to his advantage. He read all of the old school Nautilus books and watched Pumping Iron numerous times, citing Arnold as an early inspiration in bodybuilding.
Like, this guy's muscular, like this guy's bigger than Lou Ferrigno, like the Incredible Hulk. Like, he's shaped in Adonis fashion that if I could look a little bit like that, I'd be so happy.
Now, Phil had always been a naturally dense and muscular guy, who many would mistake for a football player rather than a basketball player. So it was clear that Phil's genetics had a tremendous amount of potential for bodybuilding. He just needed to believe it. So, Phil devoted the following year to building and developing the best physique he could and seeing where it could take him. And on October 8th, 2002, Phil Heath decided that he would pursue bodybuilding seriously. Getting used to the idea of wearing posing trunks and basically being half nude in front of a bunch of people was initially a bit terrifying for him. But it was an aspect of the game that he'd have to accept and get comfortable with, and he did. From then on, he committed to taking weekly pictures of himself to monitor his progress, and use those pictures as the foundation for the physique that he wanted to build. He would take the best body parts from other bodybuilders and draw them on the pictures of himself. Kevin Leverone's arms and shoulders, Tom Platt's legs, Arnold's chest, and Ronnie Coleman's back were all features that he envisioned would be on him at his full potential, and he'd embark on that journey to maximizing it. This was Phil's second chance, his opportunity to make the most of the natural gifts that he was given, and he was not going to take that second chance for granted. Bodybuilding presented a different dynamic than basketball because when on that stage, he didn't have to worry about his teammates. It was all him. 6 months after he committed to pursuing bodybuilding, Phil competed at his first show in Boulder, Colorado on April 4th, 2003. He was living with roommates at the time who partied the night before, prompting him to go to his car so he could actually get some sleep. So at 7 a.m. the next morning, he got up on his first show day, made it to the prejudging of the 2003 Northern Colorado State Championships, and came back home with a first place trophy in every category, including the overall. All of this without having known what he was really doing. This validated the idea that Phil was on the right path and made him even hungrier to improve. And with the improvement came the learning curve of living the bodybuilder lifestyle. See, after that first show, Phil loaded up with carbs and beer in celebration with his roommates, and like every other competitor, eventually realized that this was a recipe for disaster. Being as depleted as he was and ingesting the amount of carbs that he did, Phil woke up the next day looking like he had never worked out a day in his life. And at that moment, he realized that if he was going to get to where he wanted to get, he'd have to maintain the competitive mindset year-round. So Phil got to work and set his sights and energy on the only thing that mattered moving forward, becoming Mr. Olympia. He carried his momentum into another show and cleaned up again at the 2003 NPC Colorado State Championship, where he won the overall title again, this time in the heavyweight class. 1 year later, he came back to the Colorado States and won the overall yet again. 3 amateur shows, 3 overall victories, and it was clear that Phil was at the very least the best open bodybuilder in the state of Colorado. Now, while pursuing his dreams as an amateur bodybuilder, Phil made sure to continue hustling and learn as much as he can. Having gotten his degree in business and IT, he wanted to find a means to utilize that to his advantage. If he was going to become the athlete he knew he could be, he understood that he needed to apply what he knew in business to his bodybuilding career. Choosing to forego a career in his major, Phil got a job at a Bally's fitness club where he rose to the level of retail manager. He used this to his advantage to learn more about the front end and back end operations of running a business, experience that he knew would pay dividends for him down the line. Phil even recalls an instance where one of the members at Bally's scolded him for having the resume that he had, but choosing to work at Bally's.
Fitness, I was a retail manager. Instead of going to IT world, I did this.
You worked at Bally's?
I worked at Bally's office in Glendale, helping people with nutritionals, making smoothies. People were like, dude, you got too much education to be working behind here. And you know what's funny? A lot of people laughed. They're like, yeah, I'm making my smoothie, dude, this and that and the other, just trying to talk down to me. And I'm thinking to myself, these guys have no idea. Oh, you're just an idiot and this and that. And the guy says, actually, that guy that you're calling an idiot was a Division I basketball player at the University of Denver. He got 2 degrees. And then another guy goes, well, then why is he working here? You're giving me a hard time trying to posture based on what my job title is. Little do you realize, I treat this store as if it was my own. I'm getting free education on how to run a business.
Oh, if only they knew. But to Phil, he wasn't gonna let stuff like that get to him because he believed in his plan and he was willing to put in the work to attain the results he wanted. He knew that he would just need to be patient. Now, at this point, being the competitor that he was, best in Colorado was nowhere near satisfactory. Phil needed to ascend to the next level, which he did when he jumped into the 2005 NPC Junior Nationals. This show was pivotal for Phil, as it would paint an accurate picture as to how he stacked up against the other up-and-comers in the nation, because at the national level, everyone is the best in their state. Well, Phil won the heavyweight class and the overall title again and in dominant fashion as he once again presented the most complete physique on stage. With rapid improvement to his physique, it was clear now more than ever that if Phil was going to ascend to the level of success that he wanted to, it was going to be in bodybuilding. While the ceiling for Phil's progress in basketball had been reached, his ceiling for bodybuilding was nowhere in sight, something which was supported by his signing by the Weider organization. Getting signed by the Weiders is the ultimate stamp of approval in the bodybuilding industry, as the Weiders have only endorsed and promoted the athletes with the most talent and potential. Before having even gotten his pro card, Phil signed a deal with Flex magazine, earning him $5,000 a month, and another deal with supplement giant Metrex, earning him roughly $20,000 a month. All benefits of having been identified as the clear future of the sport. Despite this newfound financial success, Phil continued to hustle working as a bouncer at a nightclub in downtown Colorado called Jackson's. Now, at this point, the name Phil Heath was circulating around the industry, as it was hard to not notice how precocious he was for his age. He carried mass in proportion that many of the other guys didn't. Considering the fact that he was always muscular, it was not surprising that once enhanced, he would eventually morph into a specimen. However, that metamorphosis was happening quicker than anyone could have predicted, which inspired his self-nicknaming of the Gift, something which nobody would even dare to argue. Combine that with the fact that he had made the dedication to bodybuilding, Phil was inevitably building a reputation as the hottest up-and-comer in the sport. This is a notion that he would cement at the 2005 NPC USA Championships, one of the biggest amateur shows in bodybuilding. This was the show where legends were made. Flex Wheeler, Chris Cormier, and Melvin Anthony are a few legendary names who won this show. And on July 30th, 2005, the name Phil Heath would be added to that list of winners, and he would earn his pro card in the process, all at the age of 25 years old. But whether or not he would achieve legend status would reveal itself in time.
The caption on the cover said, I quote, Phil Heath is on the fast track to success tonight. The fast track begins here in Denver, Colorado, making his professional debut.
The following year in 2006, Phil competed at his first pro show when he stepped on stage at the Sean Ray Colorado Pro-Am and placed first in a field of pretty solid competitors, a consistent theme in his career up until this point. Phil also made history in his first pro show by becoming the third NPC USA Championship winner to also win their pro debut. He clearly stood head and shoulders above everyone in that lineup, and while the rest of the field couldn't hang with the young Heath, there was a hungry up-and-comer at the bottom of that lineup who Phil would not see the last of. Just a few weeks later, he jumped into one of the biggest shows in all of bodybuilding when he competed at the New York Pro. And to the surprise of very few people, Phil reigned supreme once again. He was competing against a few of the same competitors he beat in Denver, with the addition of heavy hitter Dennis James. But to Phil, it didn't matter who tried to step up and beat him. His momentum was hard to stop.
Phil Heath has been training to be a bodybuilder for a relatively short period of time. As a classically trained pianist and college basketball player at DU, Phil built the foundation for his bodybuilding career. He says his days with the Pioneers are similar to his training days now.
I feel like I'm an ambassador of the sport by not only doing these shows, but to take the knowledge that I've achieved and to pass it on to everyone else.
And Phil has taken that knowledge and transferred it into an amazing physique.
Phil had only been bodybuilding for 3 years, but had seen drastically more success in bodybuilding than he had in his entire basketball career. It was clear more than ever that he was meant to do this and be the best at it, and his short resume actually backed that up. Through 5 amateur shows and 2 pro shows, Phil had not been beaten, foreshadowing his potential as a great in the sport. He had a start to a career that hadn't been seen since Lee Haney. His short body of work was extremely impressive, and if Lee Haney's ceiling was 8-time Mr. Olympia, it was only a matter of time for Phil. At the highest level of every sport or discipline eventually comes a point of resistance, because the competition eventually gets tougher. Phil would realize this when he tried his luck at the 2007 Arnold Classic, the second biggest show in bodybuilding.
Well, the story of the night from Colorado, Phil Heath. Of course, he's competed only twice as a pro, Bob, and all he's done is win both events.
Absolutely, and like we said earlier in the pregame, Dan, Phil Heath, putting that record on the line tonight. He could have taken the easy way out this year, Dan. He could have gone in, a couple of small shows, could have gone back to Colorado, defended that title, maybe New York or Atlantic City. This guy could have put, literally when you think about it, 4, 5, 6 titles under his belt. But you know what? Phil is all about gamesmanship and competition. He wanted to come here with the big boys, put that physique out there and be compared, and he absolutely proved that he does belong in that group.
There, he'd have his first humbling moment, placing 5th. He was competing against some grown-ass men, and as impressive as he was for 26 years old, there was nothing he could do against Victor Martinez, who was having his best year as a pro, and the ageless wonder Dexter Jackson, who was still in his prime. And that's not even to mention the other 2 industry staples that he lost to. While 5th place in your first appearance at the second biggest show in bodybuilding is actually impressive in itself, this was the first show in Phil's bodybuilding career that he didn't win. Phil, being the realist that he is, he probably expected that show to be an uphill battle for him anyways, and the 5th place placing did very little to dim his star at all. He was still next up, especially when you consider that he still beat some well-respected names in that lineup. Despite losing for the first time in his career, Phil would find good fortune that year when he married his girlfriend Jenny in June of 2007. She already had a son from a previous relationship, but Phil did take being a positive figure in that child's life very seriously. So his marriage and subsequent parenthood would add another layer to the personal life of Phil Heath, a layer that he kept hidden from the general public. After the Arnold, it would be almost 1 year before Phil stepped back on stage. Feeling like he needed to make some much needed improvements, Phil gave his body the time to grow for another shot at the Arnold. As a warm-up show, he competed at the 19th annual Ironman Pro, where he placed first in a 16-competitor lineup, beating out Tony Freeman, who had beaten him in the previous year's Arnold. 1 month later, Phil came back to the Arnold Classic in 2008 with a vengeance, and moved up 3 placings, finishing 2nd place behind Dexter Jackson. This Arnold Classic finish put him firmly among the top 5 bodybuilders in the world, and there were no questions as to whether or not Phil could be a legitimate threat at the Olympia. In fact, Joe Weider felt that he should have competed sooner. Joe felt that Phil had what it took to place well at the Olympia right out of the gates, and in retrospect, he definitely did. However, Phil was not mentally ready for that stage. He understood the meticulous process it took to prepare himself for a show like the Olympia, and if he was going to step on that stage as the hottest young talent, he would need to make a major splash, which is exactly what he planned to do. Game recognized game, and none of the top contenders were going to doubt Phil, because they knew he was coming.
Well, whether he does it tonight or not, there's no question Phil Heath is the future, and it's going to be fun watching him compete here and at the Olympia in years to come.
Let remind you that he is the youngest competitor in the field.
On September 26th, the prejudging for the 2008 Mr. Olympia took place, and it would be a lineup filled with the best bodybuilders in the game, some of whom Phil had beaten and some who he hadn't been able to get the best of yet. Either way, it would be clear where Phil stood against the ultimate competition. He'd get to stand next to one of his inspirations whom he hadn't been able to share the stage with yet, Jay Cutler. After an impressive prejudging in finals, Phil would hear his name called as a 3rd place finisher, a placing that he was satisfied with considering the caliber of competition he was up against at his first Mr. Olympia. He was wildly impressive in this showing, and one could have easily made an argument that he could have been in 2nd place. Instead, Jay Cutler finished in second place, and the Blade Dexter Jackson upset him to claim his first Olympia title.
How about a big hand for all our winners tonight?
It was now confirmed that Phil Heath was not just one of the best bodybuilders in the world, but he was officially number 3 in his 5th year as a bodybuilder. But of course, this was just the beginning for him because he had yet to even scratch the surface of his potential, and he knew it.
So I placed 3rd at my first Mr. Olympia contest in 2008. Upon that night, I realized it's possible.
The 2008 Mr. Olympia made Phil truly believe that he had what it took to actually become Mr. Olympia someday. He just needed to wait for his moment. As the 2009 season came around, Phil was more ready than ever to make the next leap. He had the Mr. Olympia title on his mind and made that goal the focus of his offseason as he planned to compete at that show. Phil worked hard and silently made the improvements necessary as he planned to shock the world in 2009. However, the night before the Olympia, disaster struck. Phil unfortunately got food poisoning and spent a lot of time vomiting. At 5:30 a.m., the EMTs came into his hotel room and advised him not to compete. However, Phil would not drop out of the contest without a fight, and he told himself that if he was able to not vomit for the rest of the night, he would do the show. And luckily for him, he didn't. However, the damage had already been done, and Phil had lost a lot of weight right before the show. Every bodybuilder's nightmare.
Following year, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to win this damn thing. You know, it's my first time. Like, I got 3rd. I'm about to go ahead and beat these guys. I got food poisoning the night before. And we talk about things that you can't control. I trained. I did the diet. I did all that stuff. Sometimes when you're dieting the way that we diet, your immune system is very, very compromised. The slightest thing, handling of food, fish, steaks, stuff like that, it could really mess with you. Shaking hands with fans the night before could do that. You just never know.
This, however, didn't stop him from stepping out into the prejudging and giving it his all. Despite his best efforts, he was holding a lot of water, most notably in his midsection, which looked a bit washed out. He also wasn't as vascular as he was in 2008, and his conditioning was just slightly less crisp. But these were really his only flaws. Despite the setback, Phil did show improvements in some shots. It was clear based on his facial expression though, that he was not himself, likely due to his momentum being derailed the night before. When the finals were over, Phil would be announced as the 5th place finisher, 2 spots lower than his previous placing. Phil made no excuses for himself though, illness or not, he knew he was better than 5th in the world. Jay had bounced back from his loss the previous year, Branch Warren had brought one of his best looks to date, and the Ageless Wonder was not slowing down. And a guy who Phil had gotten the better of in the past had actually rose up and leapfrogged him to 4th place, Kai Green. Now, the day after the 2009 Mr. Olympia, Phil was disappointed, but he didn't feel sorry for himself. Despite not being able to control the circumstances around his late prep disaster, Phil still felt that he needed to get back in grind mode. So, the day after the Olympia, he attended a scheduled photo shoot with Joe Weider and some of the other top competitors. After that photo shoot, Phil got straight to training legs. And the media was bewildered as to why he was training so soon. And of all the muscle groups, legs? However, in multiple interviews that Phil did that day, he explained that he needed to continue the grind and refused to accept the pass that the media was trying to give him. He felt like the woe is me mentality would be the ultimate cop-out, and that was something that he did not want to adopt. So, he game planned for the 2010 season and planned on attaining his redemption.
Phil has come in about 10 pounds heavier than we just saw him at the Olympia, and we're going to see right here, Dan, if Phil has put his mark on this title. And oh boy, oh man, look at Phil Heath. Look at that level of muscularity. Wow, this is going to be good.
The 2010 redemption arc began at the Arnold Classic, where Phil came in much improved from the Olympia in every aspect. Although his Olympia package wasn't awful, Phil did bring a physique at the Arnold that he should have brought at the Olympia. He was full, very dry, and his midsection was separated and tight. This was Phil actively in the process of slowly reaching his ceiling. However, in bodybuilding, momentum does matter, and with Phil's momentum having been derailed at the O, the momentum of Kai Green was growing rather quickly. Despite having not been on Phil's level early in his career, Kai's scrappy underdog mentality fueled him to claw his way into the cream of the crop. He became one of the names who was considered to be among the best in the game, and at the 2010 Arnold Classic, he solidified that. Kai brought it to the Arnold Classic and went pose for pose with Phil without letting up. Kai knew who he was going up against, and he knew he had to be undeniable, and that he was. So Kai, for the second time in his career, beat Phil Heath at a major show. Now, having bounced back from that 5th place placing was a great feeling for Phil, but having lost to someone he had beaten multiple times over was not. And Phil would head into the offseason determined not to just beat Kai at the Olympia, but bounce back from 2009. So thus, the 2010 offseason was underway, and Phil Heath and Hadi Rambod got to work in preparation for an Olympia push. An Olympia push that he believed he was ready for, and so did the fans. Jay had just come off of his historic comeback Olympia win and looked to have regained his form, so 2010 would be no easy feat for Phil. Heading into that year's Olympia, the expectations were still high for Phil despite his late prep disaster. The fans were aware of what had happened in 2009 and also had faith that Phil would bounce back accordingly. He wasn't shy about proclaiming that either, as Phil spent a lot of time in 2010 promoting himself any chance he got. He wanted the world and the fans to know that he was coming for the throne, and everyone ate it up. I mean, how couldn't they? He clearly had the tools to back it up, and the masses loved the confident underdog, a major factor that played into Phil's fanfare. It was clear that Phil was still soaring, but the question of how much higher he would soar would be answered at the 2010 Olympia.
Competitor number 18 from Arvada, Colorado. The Gift, Phil Heath.
Front double bicep, please. Let's spread.
On the morning of prejudging, it was clear that Phil had achieved the redemption he was looking for 10 times over. If there was any moment that solidified his position as the clear heir to the throne, it was when he made his entrance for his finals posing routine the next night. Despite Phil having brought his best physique in the prejudging, his finals appearance was the stuff of legend. Phil came out significantly more confident than the previous year, something which his physique was clearly able to back up. He had just brought his best to date, a best which saw him push Jay Cutler all throughout the prejudging and finals. And at the end of the night, when the work was done and the awards were given out, Phil Heath would be left standing with none other than Jay Cutler, someone who he came up in the industry aspiring to be like, the one person he hadn't been able to beat in his career up until that point. This was the closest Phil had ever gotten to the top, a realization which surely hit him in the moment. The revelation he had in 2008 about having what it took to win was proven to be true. However, Phil did not do quite enough to knock out an impressive Jay Cutler, but what he did do was prove that he without a doubt was bodybuilding's future, something which he subconsciously wasn't ready for.
Jay Cutler!
See, Phil has always been a proper sportsman, and in victory or defeat, he had never had an issue giving his props to the better competitor on any given night. So him showing his respect for not just the better competitor, but one of his idols was out of the question. However, when reviewing the tape of the awards ceremony, Phil noticed something that nobody else in his camp noticed. He exhaled. When Jay Cutler's name was announced as the winner, Phil exhaled, which is a sign of relief. Relief that he couldn't explain at the time, but knew that he needed to self-reflect on for answers. Now, in his self-reflection, Phil realized that at that moment when the winner was announced, he was fine losing. He wasn't ready to win because carrying the title of Mr. Olympia was a heavy burden, a burden that came with zero excuses and significantly more scrutiny. A burden that came with no slack and no leeway. Phil got comfortable being the underdog because the underdog can always play it safe. If he wins, he overachieved. But if he loses, it's okay because the high expectation was never there to begin with.
I exhaled. They announced Jay Cutler's name and I go, why did I exhale, guys? Because I was happy that I got second place. Because you know what they do with second place? You should have won, Phil. I had you winning. Everybody loves the underdog now. Everybody roots for the underdog. The underdog is safe.
Very interesting.
He's safe.
Becoming the champion would be a different level, and if Phil really wanted to be the next Mr. Olympia, he would have to accept the responsibility that really comes with the title and truly own it. And that mindset and goal is what he carried with him into the 2011 season.
What was Phil Heath thinking since the day he left Las Vegas last year to get ready for this show here this year, 2011 Mr. Olympia? What went through Phil Heath's mind?
That I'm going to be the 13th Mr. Olympia.
Phil set his sights solely on the 2011 Mr. Olympia. This year would be big for him. Having been a pro for 6 years and improved year over year, Phil was too big and accomplished to fly under the radar like he used to, and the anticipation would slowly start to mount. Early predictions had Phil and Jay battling in a rematch once again. Phil, however, would not feel the hype like he used to. There was no need to convince anyone of how impressive he was or how good he could be. It was very clear that Phil was astounding. So he chose to conduct himself like a champion and work in silence that offseason. No more promises, no more trash talk, all action. The fans and the judges were going to see a different Phil Heath in 2011, a Phil Heath who was ready to own it. So when the 2011 Mr. Olympia rolled around, Phil Heath would be ready to truly embody his nickname, The Gift.
I definitely wasn't satisfied with second, and knowing that I was that close at the 2010 Mr. Olympia next to Jay, hearing my name being chanted just as loud, if not louder, than his crowd was, and just knowing that I belonged. I have a whole lot of more years ahead of me in this sport that are going to be better.
And here's going to be, this is right here, this is going to either win it or lose it for him right here.
With the prejudging underway, everyone couldn't wait for Phil Heath to come out, and when he did, he showed out.
I'm going to use the words that my good friend and colleague Larry Pepe used to describe Phil Heath, and I think it's a great description. His physique is very much three-dimensional in a way that no other bodybuilder can claim, and he said he was adding on some thickness. He said he wanted the word massive to be used among the other adjectives that are commonly used to describe his physique. And King, I'm going to just put it to you right now. Are you comfortable using the word massive to describe the 2011 version of Phil Heath?
He's the best bodybuilder to step on stage so far.
Phil had somehow brought an improved version of his 2010 package. Everything he was known for was on full display, but better.
Skin, same muscle bellies. And here's going to be, this is right here, this is going to either win it or lose it for him right here. Yeah, he looks crazy. Yeah, he is definitely on the money. Yeah, there's the money shot right there. Boom. And the crowd's giving him his just due.
The loudest ovation of the night for Phil Heath.
His tiny joints combined with his ridiculously full muscle bellies made him look absolutely cartoonish. 3D. Like a freak. He brought a wow factor that hadn't been seen on the open stage in a while, and subsequently blew the entire lineup away during the prejudging, including Jay Cutler. He was the most aesthetic mass monster seen in bodybuilding, arguably since Flex Wheeler, but he was bigger. While Phil brought his all-time best, Jay had come in visibly off, something which historically has marked the changing of the guard from one dominant champion to another.
Prejudging is over. It sounds like the crowd went nuts for Phil Heath tonight. Phil, how do you feel?
I feel awesome. I feel like the year off paid off, and hopefully, I can go back to my hotel room, figure out how I can even improve on that, and come back tomorrow even better.
When the finals rolled around, Phil came back improved and delivered a posing routine for the ages. He had never been more confident. He had never looked better. He had never embodied a Mr. Olympia more, and he knew it. Everything had finally come together for Phil in perfect fashion, and you can feel it in the air in the finals that something exciting was about to happen in bodybuilding. And that something was Phil Heath.
Front double bicep. Leg spread. Side chest. Back double bicep.
It shows her one from the back. Who's winning this one?
Leg spread. Leg spread, guys. Side tricep. Most muscular.
Is this the pose that decides the winner?
And relax, guys. Let's hear it for these two warriors. And all our champions on stage tonight.
I'm going to begin, folks. That concludes the confirmation round of scoring. I'm going to big hand for all of our Olympians on stage. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you back in just a few moments. The writers have written all year long about it. The student versus the teacher. Third place finisher. All of our presenters are on stage. The Predator, Kai Green.
And there it is, Kai Green with his best Olympia showing to date. And you can be sure, we talked about Kai wanting to win this trophy, but he also needed to separate himself from the pack, and that's exactly what he's done. There's only two guys in the world right now that are better than Kai Green. One of them is Jay Cutler. The other one is Phil Heath. And Kai Green has done what we've long waited for him to do, and that is put himself past a whole bunch of guys who, quite frankly, have been beating him over the past year. It is Deja Vu 2010, 2011, and here we are. Jay Cutler and Phil Heath will once again stand side by side as the two best bodybuilders in the world as they await.
We previewed it. The writers have written all year long about it. The student versus the teacher. All of our presenters are on stage, along with our IFBB Pro President, Mr. Jim Mannion. I think they're discussing it. What do you got, Phil? Gentlemen, in Olympia tradition, the next name you hear will be the 2011 Mr. Olympia. Please take the first place award, the Olympia gold medal, the check for $200,000, the Sandow Bronze Award, and the title of 2011 Mr. Olympia. To our winner tonight, Phil Heath.
Name in the history books tonight here in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Gift Heath.
Yeah, I mean, what can we say that we haven't said? He's a three-dimensional bodybuilder who looks fantastic, and it's going to be interesting to see how long of a reign he can go on.
Phil had finally done it. The sacrifices he made, the obstacles he had to overcome, his commitment to bodybuilding had been worth it in that moment. The greatness he couldn't achieve in basketball had finally been achieved elsewhere, and his name could officially be mentioned among not just the greatest athletes to come out of South Seattle, but one of the greatest bodybuilders to ever do it, all at the young age of 31.
When I won the Olympia in 2011, it's a different type of exhale. You close your eyes, and then for some reason, my life flashed before my eyes. It went all the way back to when I was a kid, like your kids, like that size, all the way to the current time in 2011, but it showed every defining moment of my life, every Y in the road.
According to Phil, it was all of the little things he did over all of those years that culminated in his Olympia victory, a victory which validated his saving and his second chance at life. Phil was officially the 13th Mr. Olympia, a title which he was ready to own. And while the life of an underdog is consumed by the chase, the life of a champion is a bit different, something which Phil would have to adjust to. He ended his 2011 season with a victory at the Shuru Classic in India, where he swept the competition once again.
The last time I did lose to Kai Green was at the March 2010 Arnold Classic. And I worked really hard to try to make sure that would never happen again.
With the title of Mr. Olympia on lock, Phil understood that he was entering a different dimension. He understood that he now had to think like a champion and tailor his mentality and training accordingly. Instead of being the underdog, he would now have to deal with many underdogs coming after him, something which he knew he had to get ahead of, given the quickly evolving competitive landscape of bodybuilding. But despite that, he was always ready. He wasn't close to satisfied with one Olympia. He wanted to be the GOAT, so he began looking at Olympia champions in tiers. He saw all of the one-time winners as being on the same tier as him, and then the two-time winners as the next tier, the three-time winners on the tier after that, so on and so forth. But his ultimate goal was to be on a tier of his own, a tier that would be almost impossible to replicate. With being the reigning Olympia champion came a lot of new responsibility for Phil, because the title of Mr. Olympia was not just a physique, it was an attitude, a mentality, and the greatest endorsement for a bodybuilder. And as the Mr. O, Phil needed to take that as seriously as he took his training. Despite shifting his focus to defending his Olympia title, Phil was on the road, doing guest posings, appearances, and trying to maximize his new brand image as much as possible. You know, as any new Mr. Olympia should do. But while Phil was enjoying the fruits of being Mr. Olympia, the rest of the field was trying to jostle for the #1 contender spot. With the impressive crop of elite bodybuilders in the open, Phil would most certainly have his hands full heading into the 2012 Mr. Olympia. However, what Phil would also have that he didn't realize at the time was a budding rival who would push him to his limit, and in the process create one of the greatest and most entertaining rivalries in bodybuilding history. Now, up until this point, Kai and Phil have had quite a few encounters on the bodybuilding stage, with the two sharing the stage a total of 7 times, and Phil having come out on top 5 of those 7 instances. It was clear that Phil had the edge. However, over the course of their careers, when you take a look at all of their encounters, Kai had not been too far behind. Having finished 3rd at the Olympia and 2nd at the Shiro Classic, Kai was making it clear that he was not going to stop coming after Phil. In fact, he wanted to be Phil's biggest nightmare. With consistent improvements over his career, fueled by his incredible work ethic, Kai was heading into the 2012 Mr. Olympia ready to make a statement. It was becoming clear that Kai was a favorite to be Phil's top contender heading into the 2012 Mr. Olympia. His physique aside, Kai's increase in popularity over the course of his career was aided greatly by his personality. He was eccentric, quirky, outspoken, and the true definition of a wild card. He was everything that Phil was not, or at least that's how it appeared. While a lot of Phil's rhetoric was motivational, Kai knew how to gain attention. He knew how to stir the pot and create a buzz around his name. He had the type of personality that would put fans in seats at major shows, an ability which, combined with his physique, made him Phil's perfect counterpart.
Well, you know, you have a lot of fans. The fan base is huge for you. Everyone wants to see your best, so we expect a great performance by you, not only with the physique, but you put on a great show, and I'm sure all the spectators are going to give you a huge ovation out there. So listen, give it your all. It's good. I'm going to be happy to be watching you, and I'm sure all the viewers here on NPC News Online will be watching too.
Great.
So give them a shout out, man. Give them a shout out.
Hey, well, give a shout out to everybody out there that knows what it's like to work really hard at something and try to see a dream realized.
Is your A game enough to beat Phil Heath?
My A game is enough to do a lot of damage this weekend.
That wasn't what I asked, was it, Kevin? If you and Phil Heath are 100% on game day, who wins?
I expect to be the last man standing this year.
At the 2012 Mr. Olympia, it was clear during prejudging that Kai and Phil were 1 and 2, due to the judges placing them in their own call-out. Phil came back improved from 2011 and brought his signature look but more refined, eye-popping, if you will. Kai, on that same note, brought his best physique to date as well. He had these tall bicep peaks and a very sharp V-taper which accentuated his X-frame in all of his poses. He was also wider than Phil from behind. His conditioning was super sharp and crisp, he was extremely separated, and he looked absolutely translucent under that lighting. Despite these strong points, the fullness and thickness of Phil's muscle bellies, combined with his conditioning, was simply undeniable. As good as Kai was, it was clear that Phil was too much for him, something which became more evident the more they continued to pose in the finals, because Phil just kept getting better. Once their battle was over, it was clear as day on Kai's face that he knew Phil got the best of him, something which was confirmed when they'd announced the 2012 Mr. Olympia champion.
Phil Heath.
And as we discussed earlier, Larry, Phil just a little too much for Kai and takes the next step down the road to building that legacy we talked about.
Being the consummate competitor he is, Kai congratulated Phil on his second Olympia, but also made it clear through pure eye contact that it wasn't over. Kai, however, was the least of Phil's worries in that moment, as he was ready to enjoy the taste of sweet victory. He had figured it out, especially with the help of his coach Hani Rambod, who was most known for coaching Jay Cutler to his Olympia victories. Their pairing was a match made in bodybuilding heaven, something which they both quickly realized. Phil's gifts combined with Hani's training and prep methodology created the perfect coach and athlete dynamic.
Hani, we're here with two-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath. We're just talking about the change you made overnight and how good it feels to win. What do you got to say?
Well, obviously, it was a pretty stressful moment. You know, we were looking forward to presenting a package, and by the time we got up on stage, there were some things that we needed to tweak, and in the last 24 hours, we were able to do that. And it was very, very stressful, but at the same time, we both knew that Phil was bringing in even a better package than he was last year. It was just a matter of how it was being presented on stage with the posing. There's a lot of different things that we did in the last 24 hours that I'm sure you're going to read about in the magazines coming up. And those things were the deciding factor.
So winning the Olympia the first time was, you know, a pretty incredible achievement, of course. But defending, it's a whole nother experience. I mean, you have high levels of pressure and stress and expectations, and I can't lie, you know, I was very stressed. But, you know, all in all, it just made me a better bodybuilder. I think it allowed me to mature more in some areas in my life, being more organized, being even more hardworking, being more selfish, I'd say, with my time and making sure that I got everything done in the gym and in the kitchen and all that stuff. And really just making sure that I left no stone unturned when it came down to the competition, and ultimately just enjoying the process.
Just like in 2011, Phil returned to the Shuru Classic a few weeks after the Olympia, where he placed first yet again. Behind him, however, was his all-too-familiar friend Kai Green, who placed second, just like the previous year.
Very tough. I mean, last week, you know, was very tough with Friday and Saturday night. You know, I had to, you know, fight for that one, and I had to fight for this one too. Kai Green looked awesome, but we came up with the winning formula once again, and I actually think I was better this day than I was all of last week.
While Phil would go into the offseason ready to fulfill his duties as the ambassador of the sport, he couldn't help but to have fending off Kai Green in the back of his mind. Now, at this point in his career, Phil was looking unstoppable, because since his first Olympia victory, he had only been improving, and there was no reason to believe that that would not continue, despite the challenge from the rest of the competition. Names like Dexter Jackson, Dennis Wolf, Branch Warren, and Sean Roden were seemingly all in a battle for every other spot except first. However, ahead of all of them was Kai Green, who was not slowing down at all.
Win the whole thing.
Last year he was number 2. This year I'm predicting he's going all the way.
We are rooting for him big time, not only because he seems like a nice guy, he's also one of us. He's a Brooklynite.
Right.
Kai Green, welcome to Good Day New York. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
So we see you on the cover of Flex magazine in July. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you
what do
very
you do every day? I mean, you are built. You look like you're about to burst out of this suit any second. What do you like?
Going toe-to-toe with Phil garnered him a lot of fans who would back him. The entire industry was very pleased with the package that Kai brought to the 2012 Olympia, and Phil was hearing it, but he still had tunnel vision. He was focused on getting number 3 and continuing to make history. While he didn't discount how talented the competition was, he knew that he had to basically beat his former self to continue to win, something which put a lot of pressure on him. But having the mindset that he did, Phil was more than ready for the challenge. He had to look at himself and wonder, how do I continue to win? A question which became the foundation of the work that he and Hani Rambod put into the offseason. He continued to keep things quiet in his camp as he wanted to build the anticipation and keep his mind clear during prep, something which became significantly more difficult with the advent of social media. See, when Phil won in 2011, he became the first champion during the social media explosion of the early 2010s. And while the champions before him were relatively sheltered from mass criticism and generally only got it from people in the industry, Phil had it a little bit different. He had to start dealing with criticism from not just diehards of the industry, but casual watchers who didn't fully understand the sport at all. Hell, some of the critics didn't even watch bodybuilding, yet they still had an opinion. This was something that Phil had to start battling with. He had to combat his outspoken nature and his need to stay focused, but ultimately, he never lost sight of the prize, and only used any negativity he received as fuel. A big motivator during his off-season that year was also his family. His wife had won her battle with breast cancer, which motivated Phil to train harder. And both his biological father and stepfather were both dealing with serious illnesses, something which, despite making his prep tougher emotionally, gave him every reason not to get complacent. And his wife told him that if she could beat breast cancer, then he could beat the rest of the lineup and get number 3. With the hard work of the offseason completed, Phil knew better than anyone else what he would be bringing to the stage, and his confidence was showing. At this point, he had also dubbed himself the Dream Killer, and became a lot more comfortable talking spicy to the rest of the competitors because he knew that he could back it up.
No, because it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he can sign whatever the hell he wants. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. Obviously, I didn't care. All I care about is winning my 3rd title, you know, creating this legacy that I want to live, and crushing everybody's dreams. Just like that. Crushing everybody.
At the 2013 press conference, Kai was relatively quiet and decided to say very little. While this was due to his own confidence heading into the show, it only added to the anticipation for the prejudging.
Did I not see you sign the poster and it said Kai Green, Mr. Olympia underneath it?
Yes, you did.
What's up with that?
I intend to be a person of very few words.
No.
I can show you better than I can tell you.
Fired up as he walks to the stage. Your defending champ. Let's take a look.
As the prejudging was underway, Phil came out slightly improved from the previous year. He was clearly still Phil Heath. While guys like Sean Roden and Dennis Wolf were given opportunities to stand in the center, in the end, it was Phil and Kai, once again, who would be battling for the top spot.
After last year's Olympia, even with a perfect score, I got, obviously a lot of negative feedback from fans. I think they really wanted to see a change because they were very excited what Kai Green presented in 2012. And, my hat goes off to the guy. I mean, he definitely prepared well for that. Realizing that, there takes a lot of maturity as being a champion, and you try to settle into that, and you only have so much time to settle into that. It's very, very hard because you only have 12 other people to get advice from that, and it's very difficult because of the internet. You start listening to way too many negativity, a lot of negative people and stuff, and it starts to piss you off. And I just felt like I didn't get, I just felt like everybody just concerned about the gift and this and that instead of being concerned about, hey, this guy's worked his ass off. I mean, let's cut him some slack. I mean, this guy's trained probably half the years as everybody else, and there is no magical anything that could make this guy do that other than hard work, dedication, and genetics combined.
Kai had clearly put an emphasis on coming in fuller to match Phil, which there was visible improvement. However, he wasn't nearly as conditioned as he was in 2012, nor was he as separated. He also looked a bit flat in some poses, but ultimately, he just wasn't his best. Hell, there's a strong argument to be made that he regressed in his overall package. He still had that impressive flow and an amazing routine to show off, but when it came down to the mandatories, he did not do nearly enough to beat Phil. This laid a clear path for Phil to get his third Sandow, and although he wasn't perfect, he was clearly still the best bodybuilder in the world, with little to no signs of slowing down. And at the end of the finals, Phil Heath's name would get called and announced as a 3-time Mr. Olympia.
3-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath!
Congratulations to Phil Heath, Mr. Olympia 2013, and once again, Kai Green falling just short, but a very respectable second place in a stacked field tonight here at Mr. Olympia 2013.
With this victory, Phil became the first bodybuilder to three-peat since Ronnie Coleman, a feat which foreshadowed his future in the sport. If it wasn't already clear, he was here to stay, and planned on making history in the process.
You know, this year has been very tough, but I definitely feel that, you know, with both of our collective work, we were able to achieve what you guys saw on Friday, which was awesome, and what was awesome, obviously, tonight.
As his legend grew and his impact in bodybuilding history grew, so did the criticism about him, for a few reasons. For starters, as much as American culture loves the underdog, it's up to a certain point. See, when the underdog becomes the top dog, the love and admiration they get turns into resentment, because they eventually represent the complete opposite of what they were loved and admired for, even if they don't substantively change. Think the Golden State Warriors, for example. They drafted and developed their talent, hired the right coach and front office, and built the foundation of their dynasty the right way, and then started winning, and winning, and winning, and eventually became hated. This was exactly what happened to Phil. He spent a lot of time in the NPC, building and developing his physique and eventually getting his pro card. And from then on, quietly made improvements to get himself to the point where he was ready to step on the Olympia stage. And from then on, the rest is history. Now, despite the fact that he didn't change at his core, what he represented did, and so did the perception around his name.
Please take the Sandow Bronze Award and the title of 2011 Mr. Olympia to our winner tonight, Phil Heath!
Phil Heath has had a lot of gifts. He's the gift. I mean, you know, you got gifts, and gifts is great. This dude is still fighting for his life.
It ain't all talk when you're on that stage, man.
7 days before the 2013 Mr. Olympia, Generation Iron 1 was released. It was seen as a spiritual successor to the iconic Pumping Iron, which revolutionized bodybuilding and made Arnold Schwarzenegger a household name. Generation Iron contained the same thematic elements as Pumping Iron, documentary film covering the nitty-gritty of the industry by giving insight into the top bodybuilders and their struggles as they prep for the Olympia. For Pumping Iron, it was a 1975 Mr. Olympia, and for Generation Iron, it was 2012. Despite the road to the Olympia being a central focus, the most dramatized aspect of both films is the dichotomy between the underdog and the top dog, and the contrast between their life and struggles. While Lou and Arnold were the focus of this dichotomy for Pumping Iron, Kai and Phil were the focus for its spiritual successor. Generation Iron borrowed from that thematic element to recreate a modern version of the Lou and Arnold rivalry in Kai and Phil, which subsequently created a narrative that added fuel to the metaphorical fire. Kai was portrayed as the underdog who came from nothing and made something of himself. Phil, on the other hand, was portrayed as the spoiled, gifted prodigy who was given every avenue and opportunity to succeed. Kai was essentially portrayed as the quintessential underdog that America loved, while Phil was portrayed as a villain in his way, a portrayal which was objectively skewed and downplayed the real nature of Phil's life and his struggles. While Phil and Kai did not have the same exact upbringing, they share a fair amount of struggle and adversity in common, something which the film does not properly highlight for the sake of entertainment. After all, every protagonist needs an antagonist, and as previously mentioned, Kai was Phil's perfect foil if he had one, the biggest threat to his reign at the time. So sensationalizing their rivalry made things very interesting for not just the next Olympia, but the IFBB as well. For Phil's overall brand image, Generation Iron 1 did not do him any favors. He went from being a film antagonist to an actual villain in the eyes of a lot of fans. Combine this with the fact that he was looking unbeatable and continuously improving, and Phil would have to learn to deal with a lot more hate than he was used to. But that's not only the price of being a champion, but the price of being gifted.
And then Honey pulls aside, he goes, I think we're in trouble, man. I go, why? He goes, because I know what some morons are going to think. And he's going to be mad, maybe mad at me for saying, using that word, but it's like some jackass is going to say. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, they're going to think that you had everything handed to you, Phil. That you didn't have to work hard and this and that, and they're just going to hate you for being good.
1 month after the 2013 Mr. Olympia, Phil decided to compete at the Arnold Classic Europe along with a lot of the other heavy hitters in the division. In an identical top 4 from the Olympia, Sean Roden placed 4th, Dennis Wolf placed 3rd, Kai Green took 2nd place, followed by Phil, who won the show and his first Arnold Classic title. Granted, even though this wasn't the illustrious Arnold Ohio, it was still an Arnold title, which was a feather that Phil desperately wanted in his cap. The 2014 season is underway, and Phil had nothing but the next Olympia on his mind. He had just ascended to the next level on his mental tier list and was ready to ascend once again. But, unfortunately for Phil, tragedy struck 3 months into the year. Phil's father, Donald Heath, passed away in March of 2014, devastating Phil tremendously. Phil's father was an avid supporter of his and one of his greatest inspirations, and his passing left a big void in Phil's life. But instead of allowing his father's passing to consume him, he channeled that pain and feeling of grief into motivation to win another title, this time in his old man's memory. Now, while Phil was solely focused on winning his next Olympia title, Kai was solely focused on dethroning him once and for all. Having come so close to victory and not tasting it was a very, very difficult pill for him to swallow. 2012 was a tough loss. 2013, however, was downright painful, and Phil knew it. Phil once again continued to focus on growth in the offseason to keep the rest of the competition at arm's length. He didn't need to reinvent the wheel, he just needed to be Phil Heath. Because as we know in bodybuilding, the reigning champion usually gets the benefit of the doubt. And with Phil doing enough to win year over year, there was no reason to believe that anyone including Kai would actually be able to dethrone him. Now, Kai on the other hand was running out of options. He brought his most refined look in 2012 and lost. He tried to play the size game in 2013 and lost again. And at this point, he didn't know what to do to be able to get the successful upset. So he resorted to mental warfare to try to knock Phil off of his game. If you can't beat the champion, then get in his head. This was a tactic that Kai decided to employ as the show got closer. With Phil's prep over and the Olympia right around the corner, it was time for the pre-show festivities. And at a meet and greet event, Kai took it upon himself to sign his name on Phil's pictures and products. Sensing that Kai was going to take drastic measures for his mind games to succeed, Phil was mentally preparing himself for that at the press conference. They had had their back and forths and verbal jabs in previous press conferences, but this year was going to be different. 2014 was going to get personal.
Yesterday, Mr. Green signed the poster again with the 2014 Mr. Olympia. What does Phil Heath say to that?
I mean, let's be serious. I mean, haven't you learned from last year what you did? And let's be serious. I mean, all jokes aside, there's been 13 Mr. Olympias. They've all had the right, they've earned that right to be able to write that on anything. So don't disrespect the game. You tell him, Phil. The people that root for you, that root for that type of behavior, I just don't understand it.
We're going to show you how talk is so cheap. It's so cheap. The past is the past. And we need to respect what was done in the past because it's already been written. But the truth is, the future is what we represent this weekend. This weekend, we will show you what the future brings. And I'm very, very proud to represent those people that believe and think about the power of unlimited potential in the future being not dictated by the past. The past is the past.
Kai, I'm going to tell you something, man. You haven't earned a point. You haven't earned a point in 4.5 years.
But you know what? I'll tell you this. I want you to be just as gracious on Sunday. I can't wait to hear your interview on Sunday. This is right here. I want to look you in your eyes on Sunday. I'm waiting for Sunday.
That's great.
I represent people that are looking forward to Sunday. I'm ready for Sunday right now. But I'm enjoying Saturday and Friday. And we show what you ain't got.
Oh, man.
How about that?
This is great.
How about that?
This is great. This is going to sound so great. This is going to be beautiful. It's beautiful. You see how I'm saying that? Hey, man, when you get desperate, you make faces like this, man.
Desperate? It's not desperate. I'm going to show you desperate when you do those one times.
Practice cheap, man. I mean, we've done this. We've done this dance.
Go to the hotel room and say a prayer.
We've done this dance, man. 3-0. 3-0.
Say a prayer.
3-0.
The Sunday's here.
Maybe. Excuse me. Break.
The resentment that was beginning to boil from both men spilled over into the press conference when Phil brought up his late father. And Kai intervened, accusing Phil of trying to emotionally manipulate the judges and the fans by focusing on the past.
Your best, just like how they expect mine. But I told my father before he passed that, I'm going to bring one home for him. And that's what I intend to do. I'd be foolish to come up here, like I said before.
That's what the first three should have been. That's what the first three should have been. I respect your father. I respect anyone who's had a father. I didn't have one.
Phil was having none of it. Incensed by the fact that Kai would stoop so low, he called him out for not only smearing his tribute to his father, but playing the victim.
You know what? Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Is the past.
You know what? You've talked about the past your whole entire career, making excuses. Talking about you think you're the only person that's ever gone through something in your life.
Excuses.
Everybody knows
making
your story.
excuses.
Yes.
Making excuses.
Yes.
You know nothing of what you're talking about.
You know nothing of what you're talking about.
You know nothing.
Things were clearly getting out of hand between the two of them as years of pent-up frustration on both ends was spilling onto the stage for the entire community to see. It was clear that Kai was just tired of losing, which to any true competitor is understandable. Phil, on the other hand, was tired of Kai complaining and trying to undermine the work that he had put in to get to where he'd gotten. So, in a double down on his villain persona and an ultimate mic drop moment, Phil would remind Kai why he was his father for 2 years straight.
Now, I'm no mathematician, but if you're outweighing Phil by 40 pounds, does that put you in a 285 range?
How's that feel, though, Phil? Did you hear it? Are you thinking about it? Is it marinating in there somewhere? You understand what that means?
If you want to talk about education, I definitely know what things mean. But
Phil, give me 3 facts as to why Kai can't beat you on stage.
2011, 2012, 2013.
Kai and Phil had just had one of, if not the most explosive press conference interaction in the history of Olympia press conferences, and that interaction was just a foreshadowing of things to come. The prejudging for the Olympia was underway, and Kai and Phil were ready to put on a show. With tensions high, their adrenaline rushing, and the fans going crazy, Phil and Kai were out the gates hard and posing their asses off while trying to establish dominance over the other. Head judge Steve Weinberger had them stand next to each other on the far left during the initial first callouts, and right away you could tell it probably wasn't a great idea. Kai flipped his ponytail hard enough to whack Phil, a gesture which was not only obvious to the commentators but to Phil as well. Having anticipated these exact kind of antics, Phil laughed it off and maintained his composure. He even made sure to not give up any ground and not move an inch. Kai, however, wasn't done. He made sure to continue to invade Phil's personal space and get right up next to him, close enough for them to bump elbows, and during this back and forth, Kai snapped, and in the process created one of the most viral moments in bodybuilding history. The audience went crazy, and the energy of the room went to another level, something which not only excited Phil, but the fans as well. This was an element of bodybuilding that hadn't been seen at this level before. It was riveting, it was exciting, and extremely passionate. To see a rivalry escalate to a point where both guys almost came to blows just showed how bad each of them wanted it. Now, I highly doubt that Kai was actually going to put his hands on Phil because at the end of the day, he is a professional, but it was hard to tell in the moment when it happened. And regardless of how you felt about it, you couldn't doubt how entertaining it was. Steve Weinberger did make sure to separate the two and place Dennis Wolf in between them to avoid another incident. According to Phil, this immediately brought the energy down in the room.
That's up until the point when they separated us, right? Because when Rope Man came over and separated us, you heard the crowd get really, like, it got really loud. And then you could tell the fans wanted a fight, but then it's like when you see two people like getting into it at a bar or like outside the street, you'll sit there and watch it until there's like a real ass whipping going on, and then you're like, break it up, guys, come on, guys, like don't do that, and that's how I felt. You guys wanted this more than he and I wanted this. The fans
want to see blood. They want to see blood until it's too much.
Until there is actual blood.
Right.
Because you could see that once he separated us, and Steve Weinberger had to like get on the loudspeaker and be like, knock it off, enough. Kai, go over here, Phil, go over here. And the whole crowd was like, ooh. And then you could sense, me being an energy guy again, I could sense that the energy went from here to here.
The prejudging was able to continue without incident as the first call-out ended with Kai and Phil being on opposite ends of each other. And then came the finals. It was clear that despite both being on the outside during prejudging, that Dennis and Sean were being compared for third and fourth, and Kai and Phil were clearly first and second. Even though this is a highly irregular structure for placements in the IFBB, it was pretty clear that there was a reason why they were separating Kai and Phil. And for those who understand the sport, it was actually pretty clear who the top contenders for first and second were. They both brought it, especially Kai, as he was bigger than he had ever been and exceptionally conditioned for that size. Phil was still bringing dent and full muscle with razor-sharp conditioning. That signature paper-thin skin proved to be beneficial again as his conditioning came through as it usually did. He once again had done enough to retain. But the question was, did Kai do enough to beat him?
The next name you hear will be your 2014 Mr. Olympia.
Very good. Crowd roars.
Presenting the first place award. That is being held by Jim Mannion, and it is a special edition 18-karat gold Sandow statue. The Bentweeder Standard of Excellence Award will be presented by Mr. Rafael Santoja. They will take those awards, a check for $275,000. They will take all that and the title of 2014 Mr. Olympia. And we'll find out who that winner is right after these messages. Hang on a second. Robin says there are no messages. Well, in that case, your Mr. Olympia is four-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath.
At the end of the night, Phil had been crowned the reigning, defending Olympia champion once again and continued to cement his place in the bodybuilding history books. On his mental tier list, he had just tied Jay Cutler, which according to Phil, pissed Jay off so much that they didn't even speak for a while. Now at this point, Phil was an unstoppable object, and as he continued to move, his confidence would grow. He knew now more than ever that he could become the GOAT if he really wanted to. He had just beaten his biggest threat for 3 straight years and was given the vote of confidence by the judges that he was the guy and would continue to be. So why would he think otherwise?
Four-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath. What's that you got, Phil?
Man.
You love your bling, but this is crazy. Look at that.
This is amazing. I had no idea that they're going to 18 karat gold? Are you kidding me?
That's
I mean, the
Phil
sand.
Heath is a
Well,
guess.
yeah, the Sandow is one thing, you know, but to have it, this one's obviously special. I mean, no other Mr. Olympia has had a 50th, so this is definitely. I don't know where I'm gonna put this one, you know, because
I'm going to do a special case for that. With
this has to go somewhere really special.
Glass.
Phil had become committed to focusing strictly on Olympia dominance as he decided to make his focus to win as many Olympias as possible. So his mind was only on the big show as he was committed to coming in improved as he always has, because at this point, it was still him versus him. This notion would only be exacerbated by the fact that Phil's biggest competitor would not be competing at the 2015 Mr. Olympia. In an announcement that made bodybuilding headlines, Kai Greene announced that he would not be allowed to compete at the 2015 Mr. Olympia for reasons that were unknown.
2015 Mr. Olympia is fastly approaching, and I am regrettably of the realization that I am not going to be allowed to compete.
He alluded to the fans that there were things happening behind the scenes that he couldn't speak about publicly.
Let me just say, behind the scenes, there is just so much more things that are going on than I'm at liberty to share with you. There is a lot more that's happened and that is still in the process of happening that I cannot say.
This revelation was pretty inconsequential to Phil, because as much as he wanted Kai to compete that year, he knew that he could beat all the guys after him. Kai made Phil a better bodybuilder. He kept Phil at his best, pushed him to heights that no other competitor could. So to not share the stage with him in 2015 was a bittersweet feeling. While Phil didn't know it at the time, the 2014 Olympia would be the last time they would ever share the stage together, because Kai would never give Phil the satisfaction of beating him for a fourth time, ending their rivalry altogether due to issues that he had with the Olympia organizers and the politics that he felt were preventing him from receiving a fair shake. Phil looks back on his 3-year feud with Kai very fondly, because despite the heated moments that they had, Phil recognizes that Kai was the type of competitor that made him better, something which made their bond stronger over time.
He's gonna freak out when I say this, but I love Kai Greene. I don't know him, but I love him because he made me better. And no one else could get me riled up like that but him.
However, as a bona fide competitor, he does admit that he took great pleasure in beating him and killing his dreams, just as he did with the rest of the competition.
Is he the strongest competitor you faced? Yeah. Most fierce?
Because it was emotion. He wanted it, I felt it, and I knew it, and I loved taking it away from him every time.
With Kai now out of the way, Phil viewed the rest of the competition as meat, because unlike Kai, the rest of the field was not as comfortable talking trash to him or giving him any fuel. Because like any all-time great, giving him fuel would only motivate him to beat them even harder, and they didn't want any of that. So to Phil, he was literally unstoppable, and continued his reign of terror as he would watch the competition and make history in the process. He talked trash to not only display his confidence, but also sell tickets and get the fans excited. Excited to not just see him compete, but also to see him lose. Because there was little that Phil could do at the time to really change his villain image. So instead, he decided that he would capitalize on it, by not just using the fans' interest in seeing him lose to ultimately benefit himself, but to benefit the IFBB as a whole. However, behind the trash talk and tough exterior that he always maintained was a man in emotional turmoil. See, earlier that year, Phil and his wife of 8 years would decide to go their separate ways as the two got a divorce. Phil recalls this time in his life as very depressing because he felt the divorce was largely his fault. He even feels that getting married at that point in his career was not the right call. He considered his ex-wife to be his best friend, and to see their marriage come to an end was devastating for him. He did go to counseling to work on himself, but he felt that he needed to channel that pain the same way he channeled the pain from the death of his father, back into winning. Because if he didn't, he knew that he would end up on that dark path that sent him on that run when he was younger.
I'm going to have to tell you, I'm sorry, but this was your last title last year. Sean Roden officially just took over. What do you say to this? He's beating you basically in every shot.
You commented that he was Jamaican, right?
Yes.
He might have been smoking some hopium.
At the 2015 Mr. Olympia, he came in slightly improved and defeated former Olympia champion Dexter Jackson, who brought an excellent package himself. But it wasn't enough. And Phil won his 5th Sandow.
To your 5-time champion, the Gift, Phil Heath!
In 2016, the next closest contender was Sean Roden, who had been a staple for years but had never gotten so close to the champ. While Sean had brought his best package to date, he just wasn't sharp enough to take down Phil. And although he lost after coming so close, Sean never forgot that feeling.
The title of 2016 Mr. Olympia is 6-time Mr. Olympia.
There it is.
Phil, the Gift.
Phil Heath makes it 6 in a row.
Ultimate Nutrition, thank you so much for believing me. Thank you, my family, my mom, my dad, my girlfriend, Cherise, over there. Thank you so much. And I can't forget God. Thank you, God, for providing me this opportunity to be able to do this. I never knew I was going to be a bodybuilder, but damn it, I love every minute of it. This is awesome.
At this point in the Phil Heath story, he's literally on top of the world and is a 6-time Mr. Olympia champion. Since he became champ, many men had tried and many had failed to take him down. He was accomplishing everything he wanted and more, and rewriting history in the process. He had even become the first Mr. Olympia to have a 7-figure deal from one sponsor. However, with this success came an immense amount of scrutiny. See, Phil was a juggernaut, and he was no longer just an athlete in the IFBB, but he became the face of the IFBB. Hell, it would even be fair to say that he was the face of bodybuilding as a whole. And this put him under the microscope that people in his position are often put in. And when you consider the nature of bodybuilding, this criticism was bound to affect him. With the growth of bodybuilding came the growth of many independent blogs covering the sport. So it was inevitable that a lot of these blogs and content creators would talk about Phil, and not always in the most positive light. Despite having been a champion and building the tough exterior, the mass influx of content on social media made it borderline impossible for Phil to be able to filter out all the hate. Something which strained his relationship with a lot of blogs and smaller content creators in general.
It all started when I basically reported the fact that he is making fights. He's picking up fights with fans, with young fans online on his social media. I said it is uncalled for. It is definitely not professional coming from the Mr. Olympia title holder. The best.
Is the lighting okay?
What's up, Louie? I'm with Chad here over in Cleveland, Ohio. Just he told me that you know, friends and stuff. Hopefully everything is all good and you've been keeping up with what's been going on in IFBB. Obviously I won the Olympia and I hope that you liked what you saw, because I know you've been talking a lot of shit about the guys with the guts and stuff, and I know last year there was a lot of nonsense, but this year I was able to do what I had to do, and next year will be the same.
Bodybuilder who has a bubble gut, I will not promote him. But I just can't. I just have a proper phobia. I detest bubble guts. I just don't like it. I will never change. Not because I created this term of bubble gut, but I think it is hideous. It cannot be the epitome and the proper representation of human development. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if aliens invade us tomorrow, tell them, hey, this is like the best body we have of our 7 billion plus populated planet, they will laugh at us. Really? So your best physique of a male human being is a pregnant one.
Oh, you dumbass Louis Marco fans, you dummies. Idiots, man. On the Chance page running your mouth. Hey, Louis, get on my fucking live. Get on my live, boy. And show some damn respect. If you don't, you a punk. Get his ass on here. If you don't show some love and some respect, then you don't deserve to mention my name no more. Sorry, bro, we gotta get for real. I don't want to get run. You need to check yourself. You need to have some humble pie. You ran your mouth. You said you guys had 60 more pounds and you shredded a motherfucker, and I still won. Give me my props, fool. And if all your fans keep coming on here, I'm gonna block the shit out of them tomorrow. That's word.
Phil felt that the media was directing unnecessary hate and unfair criticism towards him by misguiding their fans. He felt that since a lot of these content creators weren't qualified to judge actual shows, then their opinions were invalid, a sentiment which he held for a large part of his career. This was highlighted by his very public feud with the biggest bodybuilding journalist on YouTube, Nick Strength and Power.
Phil, Nick said that you blocked him. Then Phil replied, "Oh, that is right, because he had a long run of trash talking about me. So I didn't think he cared. So why not block someone like that, right? Simply didn't want the drama." So this was the main thing that I had a problem with, because I think Phil Heath is getting me confused with someone else, maybe some other bodybuilding YouTuber. But I've never talked trash about Phil Heath. I reported on the allegations made by Jimmy Kennedy, basically said word for word what he said on that podcast, and read the screenshots that he had posted word for word. And I even, said everything with the caveat that these are all allegations made by Jimmy, not allegations made by myself. I'm just reporting on the situation. So shortly after publishing the video about that topic, I got a message from Phil. He said, "Hey, I know you want views, but this is a legal matter which has already been handled. And because of your involvement, it's going to look really bad on you now. Good luck with legal."
While the feud did die down and subside, Phil continued to maintain that a lot of his critics were misguided.
And that's what fans have to understand. When you're listening to a blogger and stuff, they're out for their own best interest. They're not impartial to shit. They're doing this so that they can get more views for their YouTube channel so they can hopefully get paid. So if that means they have to throw a little bit of exaggeration to something,
or a lie,
or a lie, they're gonna do it. I mean,
now the issue that Phil brings up is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, bloggers with little to no knowledge on a topic can do harm by spreading ignorant ideas to impressionable fans, which has become all too common in the social media age. On the other end of the sword, however, is the importance of bloggers and their content attracting new fans and followers, which brings eyes to the sport. For Phil though, for a large part of his career, he struggled to sit back and allow excessive negative criticism to hurt his name. However, he had to balance the fact that it bothered him with the need to maintain the tough exterior of a champion. After all, he couldn't let the idea that he was mentally weak get in anybody's head, so he tried his best to shut out all the criticism, until he couldn't. See, at this point in the IFBB's history, the Mass Monster era had been going for almost 30 years, and the fans were getting tired of the lack of balance. Judges had spent the last few decades rewarding mass and conditioning as the primary winning characteristics of a bodybuilder. The aesthetic, symmetry, and balance had seemingly been moved to the back of the list. This forced every pro to have to prioritize mass and conditioning, from Ronnie to Jay to Dexter to Phil. And this emphasis on more mass subsequently began to influence how Phil's physique had changed over time. And it also contributed to one major flaw in his physique that the fans had been noticing over the last few years: his midsection. Phil's midsection at the beginning of his reign in 2011 was as perfect as it could have been. However, with every passing year, his midsection became more and more distended, which distracted from his other impressive body parts. And it wasn't just the fact that his midsection had become more distended, but it was the difficulty that he had controlling it with each passing year. To the fans, this was a glaring issue, which combined with the jadedness that they were feeling for Mass Monsters, there were hopes for any champion to take the throne but him, someone with a different look. The truth is that Phil was still an extraordinary bodybuilder. However, he was at a level where any weakness would be picked apart, in a sport where all of your weaknesses are fundamentally picked apart. Now, there are many reasons why bodybuilders experience distended midsections, or what's commonly known as bubble gut or GH gut. However, the primary culprit tends to be heavy insulin usage over time. But for Phil, that wasn't all it was.
When the stomach gets full, you're like, I want again, I want again, I want again, I want again. How does that keep you focused to keep wanting to come back?
At the 2017 Arnold Classic Expo, Phil ran into Arnold. The two had not crossed paths often in Phil's career, but despite that, they still had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. Phil made it a point to let Arnold know that he was looking to tie his Olympia total, to which Arnold replied by hugging Phil and giving him a head nod, encouraging him to do it.
Obviously, I'm at your show, exhibiting for my company, but I just want to tell you it would be an honor to be tied with you for 7. And I'm going to be training my ass off to make sure that happens. So he acknowledged it, and he looked at me. And he and I, like I said, we have a very interesting relationship, but he looked at me And he knew that I wasn't messing around. It wasn't just a rah-rah speech. It wasn't just, because we've all done that shit. He stands back, hugs me.
Wow.
And grabs me and says, and he can't really say, you're gonna do it, because Dexter Jackson is standing right next to me, who's a one-time Mr. Olympia. So he doesn't want to make him feel bad. But he says, like the nod, like, yeah.
2017 also saw Phil get remarried to his girlfriend at the time, Shuri. With his new wife by his side and number 7 in his sights, Phil got to work in preparation for the 2017 Mr. Olympia.
Your final competitor is your 6-time reigning and defending Olympia champion, the Gift, Phil Heath.
At the O, he came in just as big as usual. However, his midsection was significantly more glaring than it had ever been, something which everyone was reporting on. It was essentially Phil's biggest nightmare come true. His biggest critique that he had been hearing about for years was even more prominent than it had ever been, and it's all the fans could talk about. Despite that, Phil did what he does best and brought a strong enough package to beat the second place finisher, Big Ramy.
The recipient of the 2017 iconic Sandow Trophy, the 7-time Mr. Olympia, Phil the Gift Heath. Record at number 7. What's going through your mind? What's going through your heart?
I'm just so thankful because when I started bodybuilding on October 8th, 2002, I had no idea that I would be standing on this stage one day winning the Mr. Olympia, let alone, being 7-time champion. When I got into this journey, I was a little bit bitter because I didn't make it playing Division I basketball, and I was trying to find another outlet. And bodybuilding taught me how to be strong mentally, physically, and emotionally through all life's challenges. It taught me how to train hard when no one's in the room, when you're having a bad day, through death, through hardship, through anything that can go wrong. I always had the gym. Over at Arm Breast, I could train. I could train any time of the day. There would be days I would train by myself or with my fiance, Cherie, and I would be in there dying. Looking at those pictures in the gym of Schwarzenegger, of Coleman, of Haney, of Dorian, of everybody. And I would just tell myself, one more set, one more rep, just give it everything you got so you can put yourself in the best position to win. And that's all we can do in life, people. Sometimes life is gonna serve you up some curveballs, but I challenge each and every one of you to step in that batter's box and take a damn swing. You look in the mirror and you ask yourself, do you give it your all? You look at the mirror and you ask yourself, do you have another rep? You ask yourself, can I go to work when I'm pissed off because I'm about to get fired or something bad happened or lost my girlfriend or whatever it is? You ask yourself, do you have the guts to go after it when no one is watching, no one's patting you on the back, and no one is liking your stuff on freaking social media? If you got the guts to go after it, you can put yourself in best position to win, and that's what I did through this entire prep. It was not easy. A lot of people say, oh, Phil, he's got genetics and this and that. I put that God-given talent to work each and every damn day in the gym.
With Phil winning the Olympia becoming commonplace, the news and aftermath was less centered around his accomplishment and more on the critiques around his physique. The backlash was brutal, and the fans could not have been more vocal and disappointed in the lineup. Not just Phil, but everyone else as well. The rest of that lineup was also not as impressive as it should have been, nor did anybody stand out as a clear-cut challenger except Big Ramy. So Phil walked away that night with his 7th standout and an undisputed spot on bodybuilding's Mount Rushmore. But the hate and anger towards his placing could not have been greater. The fans and analysts alike felt that Phil's package was not deserving of an Olympia title, and that he shouldn't have won it all. Some also felt that Big Ramy had legitimately done enough to dethrone him.
There's kind of one camp that has Phil as the unanimous winner, kind of saying the bubble gut was merely an illusion, it wasn't a real thing, and that it wasn't even really a problem. Then there's another camp, which seems to be the majority of online bodybuilding fans, that thinks Phil Heath's gut was completely disastrous and he didn't deserve to win. So when he starts hitting shots like the front double bicep, the front lat spread next to Big Ramy, even though Phil still has that detail in his quads, he has that detail in his upper body, he has that crazy round fullness to his pecs, to his arms, to his delts. Louis Marco put it a very good way. He said all these body parts are connected to the gut, and the gut kind of links it all together. So in those shots, the gut definitely compromises a lot of those front shots and makes him look worse compared to Ramy.
Oh, you hate Louis. Oh, you sucker. You still sad. You all burned. You melted down. You made all them damn posts. You made all them posts. Oh, you know you love me, boy. You know you love me. Oh, man.
To Phil, this wasn't anything he hadn't heard before, and he was ready to tune it out and enjoy his offseason. He was officially tied with Arnold for Olympia titles, a feat that nobody could take away from him. At this point in his career, Phil was very health conscious. He would make sure to go get blood work done every 3 to 4 months to make sure that his overall health was still intact. Now, while blood work was a huge factor in maintaining his health, it could not catch everything. 2 weeks after the 2017 Mr. Olympia, Shuri announced on Instagram that Phil had undergone surgery to correct 2 major hernias while competing, which could have actually killed him. Her statement reads as follows: Phil was a day away from a very scary and possibly fatal intestinal strangulation. His belly button was more visible this year due to the fact that his small intestine was literally inside of it, pushing it forward right underneath the skin. Phil had 2 huge hernias, one above his belly button that spread 2 inches wide on each side where his upper intestines were caught within the torn tissue and muscle, and a lower abdominal hernia which was a part of his umbilical hernia that he was born with, which was repaired at age 2 and was done horribly wrong. This lower hernia was so bad that it tore from side to side, up and down, causing Phil to have a 3-inch hole that was an inch deep and 4 inches of his small intestines hanging over that hole. The doctor was able to push his intestines 5 inches back down into his abdomen and tighten his abdomen together and close the holes. The doctor came to me after surgery in shock that Phil was able to live this way. He explained that hernias are genetic, and Phil was born with very little tissue covering his abdomen. Doc also explained that Phil has been using only half of his abdominal muscles due to his hernia at birth. Phil has been an athlete all of his life, and this hernia was a ticking time bomb. He explained that Phil was a day away from a very scary and possibly fatal intestinal strangulation. His belly button was more visible this year due to the fact that his small intestine was literally inside of it, pushing it forward right underneath the skin. He said that out of the 20,000+ hernia repairs he's done, this was one of the worst he's seen. Phil accepts all the hate that comes with being a champion. The reality is, we live in a very troubled and hateful world. Phil and I have received so much vile and hateful comments and even death threats over his stomach this year. There is no denying that Phil was incredible on stage, bringing one of his most hard and conditioned packages yet. I'm still in shock he was able to do this all while in pain and days away from being hospitalized. I would like to thank all of his true fans and those of you who love the sport of bodybuilding. The positive messages that we received did make Phil smile. He's 7-time Mr. O, but he's a human being first. To those of you who realize that, thank you. Phil had been dealing with a serious hernia his entire life. From basketball to his bodybuilding career, he was dealing with a medical issue that he hadn't realized could kill him. As genetically gifted as he was, this intestinal issue, some would say, was a genetic curse and not a gift. Despite that, however, Phil was able to overcome the odds and continue to win, 7 times to be exact. 1 month after the announcement from his fiancée, Phil elaborated on the experience in an interview. Phil says, "You know, I almost died. I thought I just had a hernia until I went in for surgery. I was faced with intestinal strangulation, and what that does is it cuts off the blood supply and later on can lead to emergency surgery, leading into possible death. When the surgeon opened me up, my intestines exploded out. It was a nightmare." Phil admitted that he was in a serious amount of pain before the 2017 Olympia, but ignored it due to his bend but don't break mentality. In his words, Going into the Olympia, I had some discomfort, but being a champion, you just have to block out all pain. I've been cleared to train, I'm happy to relive, I'm starting from scratch. My target was winning 10 Olympia titles, but now I could do more as I got through this. Phil recalls the surgery being an extensive procedure. He was originally supposed to go under for 30 minutes, but the procedure lasted hours, but luckily for him, he made it. To Phil, this was somewhat of a revelation instead of a setback. See, in his mind, if he could win 7 Olympias with this issue, then he would be better than ever with it resolved. He had invested a lot of his career earnings on his recovery and health in an effort to stay in the best shape possible. However, that issue was one that he ignored. But if he was unstoppable before, then who knew what he could do the following year?
This is gonna feel like you got shot in the chest. And then it like felt like it, like right before he said it, and I was like, that didn't feel good.
As the 2018 season rolled around, the fans kept wondering what would it take for a change. While Phil was a cemented legend at this point, there were legitimate questions as to how long he could, or should, keep dominating. His goal was 10 Olympia titles before retiring, and if he remained in the judges' favor like he had been for the past 7 years, then it could happen. In 2018, a documentary on Phil's life called Gifted was released. It told the inspiring story of Phil's life struggles, triumphs, and everything that made him Phil Heath. Friends and family make appearances talking about Phil and adding context to his story. This was a film meant to be consumed by all audiences and not just bodybuilding fans, as Phil's life story is one that transcends bodybuilding, as it's a story that anyone can be inspired by. Phil spent a large portion of 2018 focused on recovering from his surgery and getting ready for another Olympia push. He had made an effort to come in as full and as dry as ever. However, the fans had already been turned off by what they considered to be a major flaw and were calling for a changing of the guard. Regardless of the improvements that Phil could have made, it just seemed like he would no longer get the benefit of the doubt. The judges, though, don't listen to the fans to make their decisions. Phil was still the reigning champion, and with that came his usual confidence. There wasn't any new blood in the division who was gifted enough to come in and supplant him like he did to Jay. And all of the veteran competitors who could hang with him, he had already beaten 10 times over. So there was really no reason to believe that anything would change heading into 2018.
Realistically, can anybody beat you?
I guess realistically, yeah. I mean, I can get injured, God forbid.
Minus that.
Hell no.
You take care of yourself pretty good.
No, I mean,
you're disciplined. It's not like you're partying Friday night, Saturday night at the Denver nightclub.
Things happen. I mean, I won last year with 2 hernias and an intestinal strangulation problem, and I still won.
But if there is no injury, does anybody stand a chance?
No, because I was hurt all the last 4 years.
However, for the first time in a while, Phil had been getting a lot of chirping from a fellow competitor, someone who was on the long list of names that he had beaten before. This competitor, though, had never been this vocal about beating Phil. This man was Shawn Rhoden. Shawn had been beaten by Phil at every show that they had ever competed in. Phil had his number and had long since proven to be the better bodybuilder. In fact, the one time Shawn even got close to Phil was at the 2016 Olympia when Shawn took second. But interestingly enough, Shawn became extremely vocal about how he felt about Phil, more than he had ever been before, and he did this knowing that Phil was the bear you did not want to poke. And Shawn kept poking, and while poking reinforced the idea that he was planning on being better than ever, it was clear that Shawn was extremely confident in himself, more than he had ever been.
Tell me what's going on with this. The confidence level has to be pretty high this year.
You know what it is, man? It's. I told myself I've been here so many times, with this Olympia prep, and this time around, I mean, everybody know that you're going to be in shape at the Olympia. It is Olympia. It's the pinnacle of bodybuilding. This year, I just don't give a shit. I'm like, this is me. Here I am. I am going to be my all-time best. And I remember texting Chris and said, hey, this Olympia, it's all in. It's like I'm going for broke. Like, whatever it takes to get this one, like, I'm all in.
Where do you think you can really challenge Phil Heath? I mean, maybe you don't want to say because that's kind of like your arsenal, but like expose Phil Heath a little bit.
I mean, he's narrow. I think his front double bicep is crap. His front lat spread looked like a crab. I don't think he's ever done a side chest. This is not a side chest in a pose. And abs and thighs. I mean, there are 7 other poses besides the rear double bicep. So, yes, he has, probably one of the best back in the history of bodybuilding. That doesn't mean that, if, someone like myself that working everything that I need to work on, bring my back up and go blow for blow each pose, at the end of the day, condition, shape, size. I mean, this is the biggest I've ever been, 262, 3 weeks out from the Olympia. Congratulations to Mr. Olympia for what he has done, but I don't think he has done anything for the sport of bodybuilding personally. For someone that has won that many titles, what have you done for bodybuilding? I look at, someone like yourself who was retired, and I'm like, wow, Jay's at the Army base. Wow, he's not even competing. I was like, but, to see, 4-time Mr. Olympia retired and still out there on the daily grind, and then the current Mr. Olympia that doesn't travel. That doesn't benefit our sport at all. And if you're 7-time Mr. Olympia, there should be a whole lot of shit that you have done with those 7 titles to bring, more attention to bodybuilding, more notoriety to bodybuilding, besides just saying that I got 7 titles. And I think it's time for a change.
He was coming off of a 5th place placing after having had a broken jaw during prep, preventing him from being able to adequately eat solid food. That year, he wasn't himself, but his renewed confidence and willingness to criticize Phil was refreshing to a lot of fans, and reintroduced the friendly jabbing that the sport had been missing. This sparring continued into the 2018 press conference when Sean doubled down on everything he had ever said about Phil, right in front of him. His confidence was calculated, his demeanor was cerebral. Sean genuinely believed in his heart that he would beat Phil, and it was clear.
But Sean Roden broke down each pose for Phil Heath. Are you going to beat him in every pose that you mentioned? Because you started with the front double biceps all the way to the back double biceps.
I've studied each and every opponent that's on the stage here. Phil is the 7-time Mr. Olympia for a reason. And I've trained my ass off this year with the attitude of I have nothing to lose. And Phil is the current Mr. Olympia 2017. If I didn't do my homework, I shouldn't be up here. If there's one person on stage that didn't train to be number 1 in 2018, they should not be in this stage. If you're training to be number 2, you should stay home.
Let's break down pose for pose. This is your words. Phil's front double bicep, crap. Lat spread, crap. Side chest, he never done a side chest.
Yes, I did say all those. You saw the Jay Cutler interview. I was just speaking facts. And as I said, I've done my homework for 2018. Last year, I started my pro off with a broken jaw. I had to eat to a straw to make the top 5. I've had plenty of time this year to get my shit together, to come back here and get back on the stage and present myself as Mr. Olympia.
I have nothing to say to him. Talk is cheap. He'll find out tomorrow, and he'll have that same looking Eeyore-looking face backstage.
The last word of the day, because after this, it's all business. All the talk is done, Phil. All the smack talk, all the stuff on social media, everybody exclaim they're going to bring your best package. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. What are you going to do?
Win. Simple as that.
It made myself and the rest of the fans wonder, what is Sean going to bring to the stage tomorrow? Whatever improvements he had made and whatever package he was going to bring would surely be different than what he had ever brought to the stage before. But whether he could back up all of the talking that he was doing would reveal itself during the prejudging.
Yeah, but Phil's relaxing the midsection just a little bit too much for my liking. He's leaving the door open for these guys, man, and he needs to pay attention to all the aspects of this competition when he's posing.
It's the prejudging for the 2018 Mr. Olympia, and Phil comes out looking a lot bigger and just as full as the previous year. His midsection, however, was clearly still an issue, and it was almost more glaring than in 2017. But on the other side of the spectrum was Sean Roden, who brought a package that could only be described as jaw-dropping. Sean was not necessarily bigger than in 2017, but he was tighter, drier, better conditioned, and brought a tight midsection that accentuated his aesthetic. His physique and its polish only exposed Phil's biggest imperfection in a really big way. And what didn't help Phil was the fact that he was struggling to control his midsection. When he controlled it, he looked fine. However, in between poses, he would let it go, and it wasn't a good look, something that Sean actually called out, creating yet another viral stage moment.
And here's Roden throwing down the challenge. Let's go, guys! Knock it off! Steve Weinberg. And I'm surprised he didn't hold it longer, and now he's relaxing his midsection. Never relax.
Phil Heath is making his money on the quads tonight. That's what's keeping him in that
in that group, right? Because Phil Heath,
but when he relaxes his stomach,
that's the problem.
It's killing me right now.
The midsection for Phil Heath is an issue. It's looking different.
The two went blow for blow each pose, just like Sean said they would, and gave it their all. Phil shined in the back double bicep as always, but in a pose where Sean used to lack, he wasn't too far behind. He shined in the front poses and held his own in the side poses where Phil typically dominated. The disparity between the two was no longer as great as it once was. Sean had a legitimate shot at dethroning Phil after the prejudging, as he had legitimately brought a physique and package of an Olympia champion, and that much was very clear. Heading into the finals, to a lot of fans, Sean had done enough to win, but to Phil, he was still champ. He even recalls walking out on stage during the prejudging and hearing the fans go crazy. He was also swarmed by reporters after the prejudging, which has always been a strong indicator that he was in the lead. Unfortunately for Phil, however, he would find out that that wasn't the case. Phil's in his hotel room feeling confident that he had just secured number 8. That is until Hani Rambod walks in and gives him news that he wasn't prepared to hear.
Essentially, whoever talks to us, is trying to do you a favor. That's how you have to look at it. They're just trying to do you a solid, right? So of course I'm asking questions. I'm asking everybody. I'm asking different officials, different people, different people. I ain't gonna name names. They know who they are. They're like, it's close. And I'm like, how close is it? You should prepare yourself. That's bull.
Vague. Very vague, right?
That's bull. I should prepare myself? Okay. For what? That means I lost. He's like, what do you want to do, man? He's looking at me and I'm like, I don't know, man. Let's just go for broke, dude. Let's just come in full or this shit. Not these guys, but you know what I'm saying? Like, just like this, man. I'm going out swinging, man. Like, this is bullshit. So I'm like, all right, I could be a total and throw a fit, or I could just fight, man. Just fight.
Phil, realizing for the first time in his reign that his title was in danger, had to shift to a new mentality. He was not only behind, but now had to make up ground for a comeback win, a position that he was not used to being in. However, having the heart of a lion and being the competitor that he was, he went into the finals ready to go to war. If he was going to lose, he wasn't going to lose without a fight. He was going to make Sean earn it. When the finals rolled around and the final comparisons were finished, Phil made sure to show the judges that he still deserved to be champion by making Sean pose down with him and proving he was better. In an odd revelation, Sean did not have the same enthusiasm. That desire to do battle was not there, which made Phil realize that Sean had already won, a realization which hurt him to his core.
I'm just like, nah, fat lady ain't, I don't see no fat lady over here singing, so let's just go ahead and keep fighting. I'm over here on the right, hitting poses. Everybody's kind of avoiding me. I'm like, oh, hell no. Sean, get your ass. So I walked over there and said, oh, no. I grabbed him by the arm, and I'm glad that he was willing to partake in this. But I said, you're gonna beat me. We're going to hit some shots. And we did. And the crowd was going crazy and stuff. And I was like, hell yeah. You're going to hit these back double biceps. You're going to hit this most muscle. You're going to hit this. But his mannerisms was like, they probably already told me I won too, Phil. They already gave me the heads up that this is mine. Because his demeanor was not like, Phil, I want to battle with you right now. Because if you already have a hint that you already won, what's there to battle for? There was no battle.
Despite this, awards had not been given out yet, and Phil deep inside may have still been holding out hope that he did in fact win. But unfortunately, that would not be the case, as Sean Roden would be crowned the new Mr. Olympia champion.
I will now announce the winner of the 2018 Olympia. Please take the Sandow Trophy, the Olympia gold medal, the check for $400,000, and the title of 2018 Mr. Olympia. To our winner, and new Olympia champion!
There it is! It has happened in Las Vegas for just the 14th time. We have a new Mr. Olympia. The defending champion has been knocked out.
It was a dagger through the heart. His reign was officially over, and there was nothing he could do about it in that moment but congratulate Sean for a well-deserved win. Despite his disappointment, he knew how Sean was feeling and knew how beautiful that moment was, and he didn't want to ruin that for him. His entire world had just been shaken up, and it was an uncomfortable feeling that Phil had to process.
And then when he said, and new, and then everybody went crazy. And I was just like, take it in, take it in, you know?
He needed his family and he needed to be home. He left the venue without having done an interview or spoken to anybody, and he promptly got home and felt the whirlwind of emotions he was feeling. 1 week out from the 2018 Mr. Olympia, Phil sat down with Generation Iron to do an interview with Phil reflecting on the loss. The wound was fresh and Phil was still raw, but he wanted to open up about his loss and reflect on what had happened. He explained that he did not have much of an offseason due to his recovery from his hernia surgeries, and also revealed that 8 weeks out from the 2018 Olympia, he had been dealing with a lot of inflammation. He knew that there was something wrong, but had faith that he would be okay, as he had been in the past. He also reiterated his grudge against independent media for what he believes was strategic attempts to make him look bad.
You know, you got people taking videos of you while you're hitting a back double bicep and saying like, oh, your stomach is this, that, and the other.
Right,
It's
that's
like,
what I'm talking about, yeah.
But that's fucking stupid. I mean, are we judging the guy's back, or are we judging the guy's, like, what are we doing? So that just means that we're trying to disgrace the guy and not talk about how great his back is.
At that moment.
At that moment. The back that I mean, that's the greatest back. I have one of the best backs in bodybuilding history. And you want to take a picture from the front of the back and critique that and make that a topic. That's the problem. See, that's the problem, because you're not doing it with everybody else. How many other pictures do we see of other athletes with that? Those same photographers probably have those pictures and they refuse to post them because it's like, doesn't fit the agenda.
Unbeknownst to Phil, open bodybuilding was entering a new era, an era where aesthetics and balance were going to be weighed heavily, and the start of that era had just happened. In a moment of optimism, Phil was able to look at the brighter side and realize that he was still alive and healthy, and still an Olympia champion at the end of the day. That loss, however, did sting, and made him look in the mirror and reevaluate the entire trajectory of his career.
That's one of those things that was like, he was good enough to win, and Phil had this one small issue that we can use it as an excuse for him to lose.
Who did you think in 18 should have won Mr. Olympia?
Sean.
Oh, really?
You know why?
Midsection?
Not just midsection. He won it mentally.
Oh, he won it mentally?
Yeah, he did.
Elaborate.
He won it mentally. You could see it. Like, I was there competitively. You know, Phil was at I was watching Phil the whole time, analyzing him, and he was just trying to prove he had improved where people were criticizing his midsection, and that was really his focus. We noticed that, you know, he came a little bit downsized from the year before, and as things played out, I just sensed Phil was laboring and working way harder than he should have been.
Interesting perspective.
On stage. It's just struggling and holding poses, everything. And just, you know, really in presentation in that point, you know, Sean took advantage of that and kind of like embarrassed him. You wouldn't be able to see that by pictures. Pictures don't tell you that story.
You're talking about the part where he stands up and he pauses and he looks at
it was just, that's one of the major examples, yeah. But it was happening during the whole comparison rounds. Phil laboring, Phil getting into poses slow. You know, Sean just basically showing more stage polish than him and showing that he mentally was I guess ready for the title at that point.
The main thing, he still doesn't understand why he actually didn't win.
Right.
He said nobody gave him an explanation. So can you explain to the audience why Sean beat him exactly?
Well, Sean came in amazing condition. Sean held his condition very well. Phil also was in excellent condition, but Phil also had that problem with his stomach, and that really hurt him. It hurt him in a lot of the poses. And you know, it also hurt him from the back. I mean, you could see the stomach could expand, you could also see it from the back, and it hurt him. He wasn't controlling his stomach.
He needed to reevaluate what he wanted to do with his career. Despite having been the gift his entire adult life, he began asking himself if his time in the sport had run its course. "2019 represented a new reality for Phil. This was his first offseason not being a reigning champion, and it was something he needed to adjust to. He was no longer on top of the game like he had been before and needed to figure out how he would move forward. Was Phil done? This was a popular narrative among the entire community and pundits alike. These sentiments were valid. Shawn Rhoden, despite being the oldest Mr. Olympia to be crowned, clearly had a few more good years in him on the big stage. Not to mention, the judges were subtly showing that they were going to be more stringent with the judging criteria for Open. And with Phil's issue with his midsection, where did that leave him? Phil needed to do some soul searching and take some time to focus on himself. He stayed very quiet throughout the 2019 season and spent time focusing on his business ventures and family. However, as time went on and the 2019 Olympia got closer, the speculation grew and ran rampant and became unavoidable. Given the fact that Phil was generally quiet in the offseason, his Olympia status was up in the air. However, in September of 2019, just a few days before the Olympia, Phil announced that he would not be competing, a result which, although somewhat disappointing, was not all too surprising. So, the 2019 Olympia came, and it was the first Olympia since 2007 without Phil Heath competing, and it felt weird. Not just because Phil wasn't there, but because reigning champion Shawn Rhoden had been banned from the Olympia due to ongoing legal issues based on assault allegations. So, the 2019 Olympia was up for grabs, and at the end of the finals, IFBB veteran Brandon Curry had captured his first Olympia, something he had worked years to attain. Despite this win for Brandon, the conversation around Phil did continue. People began to wonder what would happen if Phil was there, and the majority opinion was that Phil could have won that lineup, something which Phil himself probably realized.
What we're creating here is something immersive, is something experiential. We can create something for people that could make their lives better.
We are bringing you Athleticon 2020 in Atlanta at the Georgia World Congress Center.
Phil Heath's good friend Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and his business partner Danny Garcia launched Athleticon in 2019. It was marketed as potentially going to be the biggest fitness and entertainment expo of all time. With The Rock's name attached, there was good reason to believe in Athleticon's potential. Making things more exciting was Athleticon's Icon World Classic, which would have been open to IFBB pros and counted as an Olympia qualifier. Phil's relationship with The Rock opened the door to possible potential that Phil would compete at Athleticon instead of the Olympia. Hell, there was even speculation that Kai Green would make his return to the stage for one more battle with Phil. However, due to Kai's consistent trolling over the years, there was no reason to believe that this would actually happen. The pandemic delayed Athleticon, which was originally scheduled for October of 2020, so Athleticon was no longer in play, something which Phil confirmed himself. However, on some of Phil's social media posts in 2020, he was definitely cooking up something. Contrary to how he was on social media in 2019, Phil in 2020 kept showing the fans that he was in shape, something that he only ever did if he was really going to compete. So, of course, in the months heading into the Olympia, there was this feeling that we may see Phil on stage again, and as the Olympia drew closer, we were getting more and more evidence of that. So, in August of 2020, Phil shook the industry and announced on his Instagram that he would be making his much anticipated return to the Olympia stage. This news was massive, as Phil would become the third Mr. Olympia winner to be added to that lineup and make it very interesting in the process. He'd have a little back and forth with reigning champion Brandon Curry heading into the show, with the most hilarious part of this little back and forth being Phil's camp referring to Brandon as Beefcake.
So I read this article out and it was on deadline.com. The link will be in the description as well if you do want to read the full article. And basically in the second paragraph it says this. So it says about what the story is about. It says overcome injuries that come with 18 years of physical and mental sacrifice, and the beefcake that filled the gap while he was away and will be on stage against him. So obviously there's two guys that filled I suppose the one guy that filled the gap really is Brandon Curry. So I'm assuming they're talking about Brandon Curry, and I love Brandon Curry's response because he posted it up on his story, and then he posted the photo of Cartman off South Park with beefcake written across his top in a weight gain 4000 tub, which is hilarious, and he just typed in beefcake with a little emoji there, then hashtag 15, hashtag Mr. Olympia. So I love that sort of.
Either way, Phil Heath's return to the stage would be huge for bodybuilding. In the background, Sophia Entertainment was producing a documentary on Phil's life and prep as he was on the journey to number 8. The documentary was called Breaking Olympia and set to be released sometime after the show, and would have surely been a major hit if Phil could reclaim the throne. It would have documented one of the most historic victories in Olympia history if Phil could pull it off. Reason number one being that in Olympia history, there had only been one champion to be dethroned and then come back and regain the title, and that was Jay Cutler in 2009. If Phil could win in 2020, he'd become the second champion to accomplish that same feat. He was also 41 years old heading into the Olympia, which also would have put him in the history books as the 4th man 40 or over to win the Sandow, along with Sean Roden, Ronnie Coleman, and Chris Dickerson. On top of all of that, Phil had been top 2 for 9 competitive seasons, and a top 2 finish in 2020 would push that record to a decade, putting him in the company of Jay Cutler. However, all of the aforementioned history that could have been made was contingent on Phil coming back better than ever. This was a major question heading into the 2020 Olympia because of the year that Phil took away from the stage. What improvements did he make? Was he going to be the Phil Heath that we knew? Would his age finally start to show on stage? These were all questions that fans reasonably had heading into the show. But the general consensus did seem to be that Phil would come back to form, if not his prime form, something close to it. Whether it was the anticipation of his return or the fact that there was no clear-cut frontrunner, many analysts were not ruling out the possibility that he could win the show. Either way, Phil's inclusion in the 2020 lineup made things significantly more exciting, because we would either see the Gift make one of the greatest comebacks in bodybuilding history, or see Brandon Curry repeat. Or a talented dark horse who's been flying under the radar would come in and shock the industry. But all of that would be revealed on the night of December 18th when the Gift would return with a ton of anticipation and expectation.
At the end of the day, I have plenty to be thankful for. The job's just not finished. I'm just ready to get this shit started. I'm tired of sitting here.
I appreciate it.
I'm being honest. Like, I'm thankful for being able to come here and actually have a show to compete at and do my thing. But I'd be fooling myself and I'd be dishonest. I told myself I'm going to be completely vulnerable and real with the fans when it was time. This is the time. I'm here not to play any fucking games. I'm here to go get my title back. I'm going to do it, and that's it. I don't care what anybody else is saying. I know what I want. I know I've done it before, and I'm here to do it again.
Now,
The individual routines were underway, and each competitor came out to one of the most amped up crowds at an Olympia in years, highly anticipating when the Gift would walk out. Out came Big Ramy, who had brought a very impressive look. Then came Regan Grimes, and finally Phil Heath, and his entrance was electric.
7 in a row, getting a first runner-up to Sean Roden, and also beating Jay Cutler for the title way back when. And now he's back, had 2 minor stomach surgeries. Let's take a look at him and see what we're dealing with.
He had only been gone for 1 season, however, it felt like 5. It was great to see him up there again, and it was clear based on his energy that he felt the same way. He brought his signature full muscle bellies, solid conditioning, and a tighter package than he had brought in previous years. His color was on point, and he looked fantastic for 40. However, the biggest improvement that Phil made, which was very evident, was tightening up his midsection. Phil's midsection in 2020 was the tightest it had been since the beginning of his reign in 2011 and 2012. This was not a bad Phil Heath at all, but it also wasn't an Olympia champion. It was clear that age had finally caught up to him, an inevitable reality of bodybuilding. All of his signature features, although prominent, were not what they used to be, and his body did look like it was ready to be done. There was no doubt that Phil did put his heart and soul into that prep like he had done his whole career, so his package was the best he could have brought. In the prejudging, it was pretty clear that while he still was in the mix, he was not in contention to win the show. And in poetic fashion, his dream of winning number 8 was killed by Big Ramy, who brought his best physique ever and shocked the world. As the finals rolled around, Phil left it all out on the stage, and despite coming back better, he was not going to win. He was still Phil Heath, but no longer the dominant force that he once was. That era was looking like it would be over. In the end, Phil was announced as the 3rd place finisher, in what to a lot of fans appeared to be his swan song.
And that shoe just dropped. Phil, 7-time Mr. Olympia. 2-time first Olympia runner-up on the comeback after a 2-year layoff, comes back and he remains a top 3 bodybuilder on the planet Earth. And that is some kind of accomplishment, considering what he gets to
after 2 years layoff.
Yeah.
Brandon Curry placed 2nd and Big Ramy won the show. However, Phil, as he had always been, remained a prominent topic of conversation after the Olympia. Some even felt that Phil's third place placing was actually not a fair one, and that it was a reflection of his name and status. However, regardless of how you feel about Phil Heath, the one idea that almost everyone could agree on was the fact that Phil Heath probably graced the stage for the very last time. It's no secret that all good things eventually must come to an end. It's an inescapable fact of life, and something that rings true in the sport of bodybuilding, which is a young man's game. With the running narrative that Phil Heath was officially done, his future in bodybuilding was undoubtedly in question. Speculation is widely uncontrollable, and unless Phil officially announced his retirement, there would always be that hope that he'd attempt to pursue number 8. In 2021, however, that thought would be put on the back burner. Phil shifted more of his time and focus on his business ventures and becoming more involved in the bodybuilding community as an ambassador. He seemingly spent more time doing interviews and press tours than he had ever done in his career. But what was most notable about this was that Phil seemed to be enjoying himself. It definitely didn't seem like there was any kind of urgency to step back on stage anytime soon. There were no announcements or plans for him to compete again, but he definitely seemed content embracing a non-athlete role. Something which was different for the fans, but also pretty welcome. Because Phil was showing a side to him that the bodybuilding world had seldom seen. And we loved it. Phil was continuing to update the fans about his life on social media while continuing to be an active member in the bodybuilding community. While doing that, however, he would allude to the fans that he had some big things coming. Considering that Phil was a businessman, this could have meant anything, but you know how the fans are. As much as the IFBB and the title of Mr. Olympia have done for Phil, he's used that title to capitalize on all of his other business opportunities. As much as Phil was villainized during his reign of terror due to winning every year, he subsequently became the underdog upon his return to the stage. A different underdog than he had been before. This time he was the underdog who could have made history, which became something that the fans actually wanted to see. Phil losing in 2018 satisfied the innate desire to watch the juggernaut lose, but watching him come back created this new desire to see him rise from the ashes and reclaim glory again. Because the comeback story is one that is loved in American culture just as much as the underdog story is. So as the 2021 Mr. Olympia drew closer, the cycle of speculation started up again, and the fans were wondering whether or not Phil would compete, but this time with a little less optimism. So when Hany Rambod announced that he would be sitting out that Olympia, it came as a surprise to very few. But one thing that came as a bit of a surprise at the 2021 Mr. Olympia was Phil's hidden talent at commentating. See, during the 2021 Mr. Olympia, Phil went on Patrick Bet-David's Valuetainment Sports Network and did a live stream of the entire show, and it was honestly amazing. It was so impressive, in fact, that I muted the original live stream to listen to Phil's live commentary. He broke down not just the art of bodybuilding, but the technical aspect of posing and judging criteria in the most palatable and engaging way that I've ever seen anybody do. This wasn't surprising considering that Phil is a student of bodybuilding. After all, this is the man who read every book and magazine he could get his hands on and dedicated the majority of his life to the art. But I couldn't help but be impressed because that level of commentary combined with his enthusiasm was something that bodybuilding had been lacking. It had not just myself but many others wondering, can he please do this every year?
So when you talk about Brandon Curry, who won the Olympia in 2019 and then lost that following year, I am very, very sure that he wants payback. And when Ramy won last year, I pulled him aside, I gave him a big hug and stuff. You know, we had some pleasantries going back and forth, but I grabbed him and I told him, I said, I know you're happy, but you have to be better. So even for Roy, what he just mentioned, like, you know, he may have had like an ingrown hair here and there or whatever. You literally have to consider what type of skin texture do you have? How does your body respond to being shaved as far as like wax or those creams
My chest
or
did
whatever?
Not like it. I had bumps.
Right.
Whatever.
So there's that type of prep of exfoliation night during the pre-judging. They're going to call them by number or name. They're going to bring them out maybe in a group of 4 or 5. They're going to move them around doing different poses and bring in some other people, move some other people back.
This is a good opportunity for our listeners. What poses are they going to be judged on here? And we have some graphics behind us that we can pull up. What are the poses that these guys are going to be judged on, and what are the judges looking for in those poses?
So we're going to have front double biceps like we have in the back, right? So the front double.
It was the morning of the Boston Pro, the first bodybuilding show I'd ever be attending. Considering this was the inaugural Boston Pro and Boston is the biggest metro area I frequent the most, I couldn't miss it. especially considering that most of my favorite legends would be in attendance and available for a meet and greet. I couldn't miss out on the opportunity to meet Dexter Jackson, Flex Wheeler, Victor Martinez, who's still yoked by the way, Jay Cutler, whose NPC show I was 6 weeks out from, and Ronnie Coleman, the king himself. And another man who was there was none other than Phil Heath. Now, I knew that he would be in attendance, and I initially just wanted to meet him. But I had just started this channel and had the bright idea of possibly asking him for an interview. I felt like it was a long shot considering the fact that I had like 8 subscribers and I was going to be meeting him for the first time. Not to mention, he didn't have the best history and relationship with independent media, but I figured the worst he could say is no, right? Now, the organizers separated VIP ticket holders and general admission and had us walk through a mini museum that they created. After a little bit of time waiting, I finally got into the prejudging. It was actually pretty incredible getting to see some of these pros on stage and in person. Seeing them on Instagram is one thing, but being 30 feet from them and getting to observe the detail that they have in their physique just exemplified the ridiculous amount of hard work that they actually put in to get there. It was a stunning yet somewhat intimidating sight. After the prejudging was over, there were multiple lines of people outside the entrance waiting to take pictures with Jay, Phil, Victor, and Urs Kalsinski, who was hugging every single fan he saw, by the way. But I made sure to get in line and get at least one picture with all 3 of them, just so that I wasn't a completely foreign face when I saw Phil later. After the pictures, I went to get a quick pump at the nearest gym I can find, ate my meals in my car, and patiently waited for finals to roll around. Once I got back to the hotel, the VIP section was available for entry. In came Dexter Jackson and then Flex Wheeler. And at this point, there was a lot going on, but I turned to my left and see a crowd of people surrounding someone. After I maneuver my way by the crowd, I see that it's Phil Heath, who was just talking. The meet and greet hasn't even started yet, but Phil was shooting the shit and answering questions from this entire crowd of fans about everything. Fitness, business, and his personal life. Phil was an open book, and I could tell right away that he was genuinely happy to talk to the fans. Not only that, but he was actually invested in having a substantive dialogue, something which has always been a big characteristic of his. Phil had cited Ronnie Coleman as one of his biggest inspirations due to his willingness to have a conversation with every fan, and Phil had clearly been inspired by that. The king himself was also in attendance. Now, Phil is a great orator and speaker, and when he talks, he immediately grabs your attention. Hell, I was across the room and still peeking over to try to hear what he was saying. But after that was done, came the official meet and greet and my big moment. The moment I really drove all the way to the Boston Pro for. I was going to interview Phil Heath. On my way there, I had it all planned out in my head. I knew what I was going to ask him, and I knew how I was going to ask it. And I really wanted to make a strong impression and most importantly, make him feel comfortable talking to me. But as I was in line, I went from feeling confident to feeling like B-Rabbit in 8 Mile. Palms were sweaty, knees weak, arms were heavy, and I was shook, alright? Phil is an unintentionally intimidating guy. Now, I had already met him, but that was just a very quick picture. This was going to be an entire conversation. And the moment I realized I was up next, I forgot every question I was going to ask. I drew a complete blank, and then the person in front of me left and Phil turned his head and attention right to me, and I thought to myself, holy shit, this is it. I went up to Phil, shook his hand, and realized that I was looking greatness in the face, and it was definitely a bit intimidating. So I asked him as politely as possible if I could ask him a few questions for my YouTube channel, and as soon as he heard that and saw my microphone, I shit you not, he lost a smile on his face. It's like he heard YouTube channel and got PTSD, and I understood why. I totally got it and would have been perfectly fine if he declined. But as much as I could tell he was really reluctant to do it, he still gave me a nod and said sure. And at this point I understood that it was a pretty big placement of trust in me, some random dude he didn't know. But I wasn't looking to make him look bad or weird, nor was I looking for some kind of viral moment. Hell, I didn't even have a good idea of what I was going to use that piece of content for at the time. I knew I just needed to step outside my comfort zone and do something to put myself and my channel out there. And I felt what better way to do that than to ask one of the GOATs for an interview. Now, I'm going to play this interview in its entirety, but I have to warn you, I had zero interviewing experience, forgot all of my questions, and was nervously shooting from the hip. Which is the reason why the first question I asked him was probably the dumbest question I could have asked him.
So, are you ever stepping back on stage again?
No, I mean, you guys will find that out very soon. So I'll make an announcement.
Yeah, and in terms of like your philosophy in the off season.
I mean, at the end of the day, there's no dirty bulk, mentality. I definitely feel like it's your opportunity to figure out what doesn't work, because during pre-contest, everybody's trying to figure out, well, does chicken outweigh the fish or the versus this or versus that? It's like, but you had the whole offseason to figure this stuff out. So you have to, if you're going to play around with different combinations of carbs, fats, and proteins, it's your offseason that you should do it in, because everybody's different. So then you can kind of have a better map as to, based on your progress, what you should be doing pre-contest, even if you work with a coach. So I think the off-season is very important to figure out what your body can assimilate with the proteins and all the other macronutrients. So if you focus more on that, take the right type of pictures, not feel like you have to post them all the time online, because that's overly seeking validation from people that probably, they're not competing, and if they do, they're not going to always root for you.
Right. I've noticed that those people can be overly critical.
Yeah, so you might want to just keep some of that to yourself, share it with a couple people, and then maybe if you feel like you want to post something as an accolade, like, cool. But to each his own. I just always believe that, some type of holding things to yourself is important.
Yeah.
Because you're by yourself on stage.
Right. And final question. Besides Rami, is there anybody else in the Open that you see having a legitimate shot at taking the title?
I think Brandon can do it. I think Hadi can do it. I think those two guys could do it for sure. I think if Hadi would have got an opportunity to stand next to those guys in more comparisons, because they didn't really give him that chance in the prejudging last year, and I made numerous comments about that, he would expose their lack of conditioning. I think with Rami, of course, he looks great, but Brandon has better shape. If you can come in really diced, I think he could beat him. I think Hadi is a combination, but he's shorter. But he is fairly complete, in my opinion. But I would prefer to see him in the middle one time and have them on each side, and just to let people see it. Because until we get to see that, we won't really know. So, but those would be like my two picks, because they have more experience on the Olympic stage as well.
Thank you,
Phil. Good luck with your channel, man.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you,
Good luck.
Phil.
Good
I
luck
really
with your channel,
appreciate it.
man.
This moment is one that I will never forget. As trivial as that statement seemed, Phil probably didn't know how much that meant to me. For him to have given me those 3 minutes of his time to support my tiny YouTube channel was something that he really didn't have to do. And for him to wish me luck and offer me those words of encouragement as we parted ways was a moment that I will forever be grateful for. And I hope that as this channel grows and my brand grows, Phil and I can actually cross paths and have a proper interview. So on the off chance that you're watching this, Phil, thank you. Phil Heath has not officially announced his retirement from bodybuilding, and until he does, there will continue to be hope that maybe, just maybe, he graces the stage one more time, no matter how unlikely that may be. Phil has spent a ton of time giving back to the community because of how much the community gave to him, something which he's been taking seriously. He's been working on broadening his brand awareness beyond just bodybuilding, but into the overall fitness, business, and entrepreneurial communities. Phil has seemingly been everywhere these days, and in contrast from his image during his reign, he's received nothing but positive energy and love from the community, especially as he's made an effort to pivot to a role of helping his fans through honesty and transparency.
I have body dysmorphia. That's right. I have it. I've had it for a very long time, well over 20 years. But most importantly, over the last 2 years. How I deal with it. I get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, and I say, Phil, I love you. I love you for everything that life has thrown at you, and you stood tall and you decided that you wanted to do better.
Among bodybuilding history have been countless greats who've touched the stage and touched the hearts of an entire generation, sometimes multiple, but one who stands above many is Phil Heath. Behind the posing oil, the tan, the muscle, and the intensity is the resilient champion from South Seattle who was determined to be great at something, and boy did he do it. Since he stepped away from the stage, he's embraced the role of a public speaker and mentor to not just competitors, but everyone in the bodybuilding community. He spent a lot of time working with other IFBB pros to help them get more recognition and have access to greater opportunities outside of the sport. Throughout his entire career, he took his business knowledge and industry knowledge and practically applied it. He went from working at Bally's as a manager to being able to rake in about $20,000 a weekend just for guest posings. And for a major portion of his career, he did a lot of that without an agent. He spent a lot of his career behind the scenes petitioning for athletes to have a seat at the table, to be involved in the important conversations. And he continues to work towards that effort by not just trying to initiate those conversations, but by presenting his life and knowledge as an open book for all to read and learn from. When asked how he was able to try to continue to win year after year, he cites insanity and madness as the primary reasons. What can we learn from the life of Phil Heath? It's that everyone's destination may have a varied number of paths, and navigating those muddy paths to get to your destination is not easy. It requires grit, tenacity, and a burning desire to make it. But in order to get there, you have to want it more than you want to breathe, and never give up on yourself along the way, because that destination could in fact be your destiny. And as the story of Phil Heath continues, it's only right that we end by saying, to be continued. I'm Large Kofi. Thank you for watching.